60 million years before the rise of humanity, when the galaxy bore little resemblance to the war-torn realm of the 41st millennium, an ancient civilization gazed upward at the stars with bitter envy. The Necrontyr inhabited a harsh world orbited by a dying star whose malevolent radiation bathed their homeworld in lethal energy. Their lives were brief and painful, marked by cancers that ate away at their flesh and genetic damage that passed from generation to generation. Despite their advanced technology and sophisticated society, the Necrontyr were condemned to watch their bodies decay even as their minds reached toward greatness. The source of their torment became clear as they developed interstellar travel and encountered the Old Ones, an ancient race that had already mastered the galaxy for millions of years. These beings possessed something the Necrontyr could never achieve through technology alone: effective immortality. The Old Ones had learned to manipulate their own biology and the fundamental forces of life itself, extending their existence across geological ages while maintaining their physical and spiritual integrity. They had seeded countless worlds with life, guided the evolution of younger races, and established a galactic civilization that spanned the stars. The contrast between the two civilizations could not have been starker. Where the Necrontyr struggled against the limitations of their dying flesh, the Old Ones thrived in bodies that could be renewed and enhanced at will. Where the Necrontyr faced extinction within decades of birth, the Old Ones contemplated projects that would unfold across millennia. The younger race's requests for aid in overcoming their biological limitations were met with cold indifference or outright refusal, as the Old Ones viewed the Necrontyr as an upstart species unworthy of their ancient wisdom. This rejection ignited a hatred that would consume the galaxy. The Necrontyr declared war upon the Old Ones, launching fleets across the void to challenge their supremacy. Yet for all their technological prowess and burning desire for revenge, the Necrontyr found themselves hopelessly outmatched. The Old Ones wielded psychic powers that could tear apart starships with thought alone, and their mastery of the webway allowed them to strike anywhere in the galaxy while remaining beyond retaliation. Necrontyr fleets were systematically destroyed, their colonies burned, and their armies scattered to the stellar winds. As defeat followed defeat, the Necrontyr faced the grim reality of their situation. Their enemy possessed advantages that could not be overcome through conventional warfare. The Old Ones' psychic abilities grew stronger with each passing generation, while their webway network rendered traditional strategic thinking obsolete. Worse still, the Old Ones had begun uplifting younger races to serve as their proxies, granting psychic powers to species like the Eldar and the Krork, who would later become the Orcs. These newly awakened races proved devastatingly effective against Necrontyr forces, wielding reality-altering abilities that turned battles into slaughters. It was during this darkest hour that the Necrontyr encountered beings that would forever alter the course of galactic history. Deep in the void between stars, ancient entities stirred within the hearts of dying suns. The Katan, the star gods, were creatures of living energy that had fed upon stellar radiation for eons beyond counting. These beings possessed power on a cosmic scale, able to manipulate matter and energy with casual ease, but they had remained largely dormant, content to slowly consume the nuclear fires of stars. The first contact between the Necrontyr and the Katan occurred when Necrontyr deep space explorers detected unusual energy signatures emanating from a red giant star. Investigation revealed the presence of something vast and alien within the stellar core, a consciousness of such magnitude that it dwarfed anything the Necrontyr had previously encountered. The entity that would later be known as the Nightbringer responded to their tentative communications with curiosity rather than hostility, intrigued by these short-lived creatures who dared to approach a star god. The negotiations that followed would reshape the galaxy. The Katan possessed the raw power to challenge the Old Ones directly, but they lacked physical forms capable of operating outside stellar environments. The Necrontyr, meanwhile, had the technology and infrastructure to wage galactic war, but lacked the supernatural abilities needed to match their enemies. A bargain was struck that seemed to benefit both parties. The Katan would be provided with bodies of living metal that could contain their essence while allowing them to interact with the physical universe, while the Necron tier would be granted the immortality they had always sought. The biotransference process began with the construction of massive facilities across the Necron tier homeworld and their remaining colonies. These installations, powered by technologies that merged Necron tier science with Catan knowledge, were designed to strip away the consciousness and life essence of entire populations while preserving their memories and personalities in mechanical forms. The living metal used in the process was itself a marvel of engineering, composed of self-repairing nanotechnology that could adapt to damage and regenerate from all but the most catastrophic destruction. The first subjects of biotransference were volunteers from the Necron tier nobility and warrior castes, individuals who viewed the process as a glorious transformation that would grant them the power to destroy their enemies. As each Necron tier entered the biotransference chambers, their flesh was systematically dissolved, while their neural patterns were encoded into quantum matrices within their new mechanical bodies. The process was agonizing beyond description, as consciousness remained active throughout the transformation, experiencing every moment of their biological death and mechanical rebirth. What emerged from the biotransference chambers were beings that retained the memories and basic personality patterns of their former selves, but had been fundamentally altered in ways that would not become apparent until much later. The newly created Necrons possessed bodies of incredible durability and strength, immune to disease, aging, and most forms of conventional damage. Their weapons and technology had been enhanced with Catan knowledge, granting them access to sciences that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. Yet the price of this transformation was far greater than the Necron tier had realized. The biotransference process had not simply granted them mechanical bodies, it had stripped away their souls, leaving them as hollow echoes of their former selves. The rich emotional spectrum that had defined Necron tier culture was reduced to pale shadows, while their capacity for creativity and growth was severely diminished. Most devastating of all, they had become slaves to the Catan's will, their consciousness bound by quantum shackles that made disobedience impossible for all but the strongest-willed individuals. The Catan, meanwhile, had achieved their own goals through the bargain. Encased in bodies of living metal that could channel their cosmic power, they were no longer confined to stellar cores, but could stride across worlds as gods made manifest. The Nightbringer took the form of a towering skeletal figure wreathed in darkness, its very presence inspiring primal terror in living beings. The Deceiver appeared as a constantly shifting entity of mirrors and illusions, its true form never quite visible, but always beautiful and terrible. The Void Dragon manifested as a creature of pure technological power, its touch able to corrupt and control any machine it encountered. With their new forms and their Necron legions, the Catan turned their attention to the old ones with devastating effect. The war in heaven entered a new phase as reality itself became a battlefield. Necron fleets emerged from the void wielding weapons that could extinguish stars and shatter planets, while Catan powers rewrote the laws of physics in localized areas. The old ones found their ancient advantages neutralized as the Catan proved immune to psychic assault and capable of disrupting the webway through their manipulation of space-time. The conflict that followed consumed entire star systems and left scars upon reality that persist to the present day. Necron tomb ships, vast constructs that served as mobile fortresses and manufacturing centers, swept across the galaxy in coordinated campaigns. These vessels were marvels of engineering that combined Necron tier technology with Catan knowledge, capable of self-repair and equipped with weapons that could crack continental plates or drain the life from entire worlds. Their hulls were composed of the same living metal as Necron bodies, allowing them to adapt to enemy tactics and regenerate from damage that would cripple conventional starships. The old ones responded by accelerating their uplift programs, granting psychic abilities to ever more races in desperate attempts to match Necron numbers. The Eldar reached new heights of psychic evolution during this period, their abilities growing to levels that would later be remembered as godlike. The Krork were transformed into living weapons of incredible ferocity and cunning, their entire species reshaped for warfare against the Necron threat. Other races, many now lost to history, were similarly enhanced and thrown into the conflict. Yet for all their efforts, the Old Ones found themselves gradually losing ground. The Khatan's manipulation of fundamental forces allowed them to corrupt entire sectors of space, turning the galaxy's own structure into a weapon against their enemies. Stars were extinguished to deny the Old Ones' energy sources, while planets were transformed into tomb worlds that could serve as staging grounds for further conquest. The webway itself came under assault as the Void Dragon's influence spread through the galaxy's technological infrastructure. The turning point came when the Necrons succeeded in breaching the Old Ones' primary strongholds. These ancient citadels, protected by millennia of accumulated defenses and psychic barriers, fell one by one to coordinated assaults that combined overwhelming firepower with Khatan reality manipulation. The slaughter that followed was systematic and thorough, as the Necrons showed no mercy to their ancient enemies. Entire Old One populations were exterminated, their knowledge and culture erased from the galaxy. The final defeat of the Old Ones came not through a single decisive battle, but through the gradual collapse of their civilization under sustained assault. Their webway network, damaged by Khatan interference, began to fail in critical locations. Their client races, overwhelmed by the scope of the conflict, turned upon each other in desperate struggles for survival. The psychic emanations generated by so much death and suffering began to coalesce in the warp, creating the first stirrings of what would later become the Chaos Gods. With their primary enemies defeated, the Khatan turned their attention to consolidating their victory. The galaxy lay in ruins, its stellar population decimated, and its surviving civilizations reduced to primitive barbarism. The Necrons had proven themselves to be the perfect servants, tireless and obedient, capable of maintaining the vast infrastructure needed to govern a galactic empire. Yet even as the Khatan savored their triumph, seeds of their own downfall were already being sown. The biotransference process had not affected all Necrons equally. While the vast majority had been reduced to mindless automatons capable only of following basic programming, a few individuals had retained enough of their original consciousness to harbor resentment at their enslavement. These silent rebels, led by figures who would later be known as the Silent King and his royal court, began to plan their own revolution against their supposed benefactors. The opportunity for rebellion came when the Khatan, drunk on their own power and success, began to turn against each other. These ancient beings had never been truly unified in their goals, and with the Old Ones defeated, their fundamental differences began to surface. Some Khatan sought to consume all life in the galaxy, while others preferred to rule over vast populations of servants. Still others became obsessed with abstract concepts like fear, deception, or technological perfection, losing sight of practical concerns in favor of philosophical pursuits. The Necron leadership, still possessing enough free will to recognize opportunity, began to exploit these divisions. They played the Khatan against each other, providing intelligence and support to whichever faction served their purposes while secretly preparing for a coordinated strike against all of their former masters. The weapons used in this betrayal were forged from the Khatan's own knowledge, reality-altering devices capable of shattering even beings of cosmic power into manageable fragments. The war against the Khatan was brief but devastating. The Star Gods, caught off guard by their servants' rebellion and weakened by their internecine conflicts, found themselves overwhelmed by coordinated assaults from across the galaxy. One by one, they were shattered into fragments and imprisoned within specially constructed tesseract labyrinths, pocket dimensions that could contain their essence while preventing them from reconstituting their full power. The Nightbringer was broken into dozens of shards, each one a pale reflection of the original's terrible might. The Deceiver suffered a similar fate, its fragments scattered across hidden vaults throughout Necron space. Only the Void Dragon managed to partially escape this fate, fleeing to the Sol system, where it would later crash upon the world that would become known as Mars. Even this victory came at a cost, as the dragon's influence would eventually corrupt the human Adeptus Mechanicus, turning them into unwitting servants of Necron interests. The other Khatan shards were carefully cataloged and stored, their prison tombs hidden within the deepest vaults of Necron tomb worlds, where they could be studied and potentially exploited in future conflicts. With both the Old Ones and the Catan defeated, the Necrons found themselves masters of a dead galaxy. The prolonged warfare had devastated entire sectors, leaving behind radioactive wastelands and shattered worlds. The psychic upheaval caused by the conflict had torn holes in reality itself, allowing the energies of the warp to spill into real space and corrupt everything they touched. The surviving younger races, traumatized by their experiences and lacking the guidance of the Old Ones, had devolved into savage barbarism or fled to the galaxy's outer reaches. The Necron leadership, surveying the ruins of their victory, came to a sobering realization. Their empire, vast though it was, ruled over nothing but death and desolation. The biotransference process had left them capable of maintaining their technology, but largely incapable of creating new innovations or adapting to changing circumstances. Worse still, their mechanical bodies, while incredibly durable, were beginning to show signs of degradation after millions of years of continuous operation. Quantum decay was slowly eroding their consciousness matrices, threatening to reduce even the most sophisticated Necron nobles to mindless automatons. The solution proposed by the Silent King and his advisors was as audacious as it was necessary. The Necrons would enter a period of hibernation, retreating to specially constructed tomb worlds where they could wait out the galaxy's recovery while their own bodies underwent extensive repair and maintenance. Advanced stasis systems would slow the decay of their quantum matrices to negligible levels, while automated systems would monitor the galaxy's development and awaken the sleepers when conditions became favorable for renewed expansion. The Great Sleep protocols were implemented across millions of tomb worlds throughout the galaxy. These facilities, constructed with the same living metal technology as Necron bodies, were designed to remain hidden and protected for millions of years. Each tomb world was equipped with sophisticated monitoring systems that would track galactic development, waiting for the emergence of new civilizations that could serve as either subjects or resources for the awakened Necrons. The process of entering the Great Sleep was carefully orchestrated to ensure maximum efficiency and security. Necron legions marched into vast sepulchral chambers where they would remain motionless for eons, their weapons and equipment stored in adjacent armories. Command protocols were established to ensure orderly awakening when the time came, with specific hierarchies and objectives programmed into each tomb world's central systems. Fail-safes were installed to prevent premature awakening or unauthorized access by potential intruders. As the last Necron entered stasis, the galaxy fell into its longest night. The tomb worlds sealed themselves beneath planetary surfaces or within asteroid fields, their presence masked by sophisticated cloaking systems that would hide them from detection for millions of years. The automated monitoring systems began their patient vigil, recording the slow recovery of galactic civilization while their masters dreamed of conquest and revenge. The tomb worlds that dotted the galaxy after the Great Sleep represented the most ambitious construction project in galactic history. Millions of these sepulchral complexes were carved into planets, moons, and asteroids across every sector, from the densely populated core systems, where ancient civilizations had once flourished, to the sparse-rimmed territories, where only the hardiest explorers had ventured. Each tomb world was a marvel of Necron engineering, designed to function autonomously for geological ages, while protecting its slumbering inhabitants from every conceivable threat. The distribution of these tomb worlds followed strategic patterns that reflected the military doctrine of the Necron dynasties. Major tomb complexes were established on worlds with stable geological structures and defensible positions, often within systems that controlled key hyperspace routes or possessed valuable resources. Secondary sites were hidden within asteroid belts, gas giant moons, and the cores of seemingly barren worlds, creating layered defense networks that could support each other during eventual reawakening. The most critical installations were buried beneath the surfaces of worlds that would appear unremarkable to future civilizations, their presence masked by sophisticated holographic projectors and quantum scramblers that rendered them invisible to all but the most advanced scanning technologies. The architecture of these tomb worlds varied according to the preferences and resources of their respective dynasties, but all shared certain fundamental characteristics. Vast underground chambers stretched for hundreds of kilometers, their walls composed of living metal that could repair minor damage and adapt to changing conditions. The burial halls themselves were arranged in precise geometric patterns that reflected Necron obsessions with order and hierarchy, with the most important nobles occupying central positions, while lesser warriors were arranged in radiating formations around them. Each chamber was equipped with its own life support systems, though these were largely redundant given the Necrons' mechanical nature, and atmospheric processors that would activate during awakening protocols to clear away any accumulated debris or atmospheric contamination. The stasis crypts that housed individual Necrons were technological marvels that pushed the boundaries of what was possible, even by the standards of their advanced civilization. Each sarcophagus was carved from a single block of living metal and equipped with quantum field generators that could slow the passage of time within their confines to near absolute zero. Molecular stabilizers prevented the gradual decay that affected all matter over cosmic timescales, while neural interface systems maintained minimal electrical activity within the occupant's consciousness matrix to prevent complete shutdown. The most sophisticated crypts, reserved for Necron nobles and high-ranking officers, included memory core backups and personality reconstruction protocols that could restore their occupants even if their primary consciousness matrices suffered catastrophic damage. Maintaining these vast complexes during the Great Sleep fell to the Canoptech constructs, specialized automata that had been designed specifically for this purpose. These mechanical servants represented a different branch of Necron technology than their warrior forms, optimized for maintenance and construction rather than warfare. Canoptech wraiths phased through solid matter as they patrolled the tomb complexes, their serpentine forms allowing them to access areas that would be impossible for larger constructs to reach. Their dimensional destabilization matrices could manipulate matter at the molecular level, enabling them to perform delicate repairs on stasis systems or clear away accumulated sediment from critical components. Canoptech scarabs swarmed through the tomb worlds in vast numbers, their diminutive size allowing them to inspect every component of the massive installations. These beetle-like constructs were equipped with sophisticated sensor arrays that could detect problems ranging from microscopic fractures in living metal walls to quantum fluctuations in stasis field generators. When repairs were needed, the scarabs could disassemble themselves to provide raw materials or combine their efforts to tackle larger problems. Their self-replicating capabilities ensured that their numbers remained constant despite inevitable losses to wear and system failures over the millennia. The larger Canoptech spiders served as mobile command centers for the smaller constructs, their multi-limbed forms perfectly adapted for complex engineering tasks. These spider-like automata possessed fabricator arrays that could manufacture replacement components for damaged systems, drawing upon stockpiles of raw materials stored within the tomb world's deepest vaults. Their advanced artificial intelligences were programmed with extensive databases of Necron technology, allowing them to diagnose and repair problems that would challenge even skilled technicians. During periods of intensive maintenance, spiders could coordinate the efforts of thousands of smaller constructs, directing their activities with mechanical precision. Despite the sophistication of these maintenance systems, the passage of 60 million years inevitably took its toll on many tomb worlds. The quantum decay that affected all Necron technology proceeded at different rates depending on local conditions, with some installations suffering more severe degradation than others. Tomb worlds located near stellar phenomena or within regions of high background radiation experienced accelerated aging, their stasis systems struggling to maintain stability against constant bombardment by cosmic rays and exotic particles. Others fell victim to geological processes that their designers had not fully anticipated, as planetary cores shifted and tectonic plates moved over cosmic timescales. The most catastrophic failures occurred when Tomb World's primary power systems began to fail. These installations drew their energy from a variety of sources, including geothermal taps that reached deep into planetary cores, solar collection arrays that gathered stellar radiation, and exotic matter reactors that converted small amounts of material into vast quantities of energy. When these systems malfunctioned, the cascade effects could be devastating. Stasis fields would flicker and fail, allowing time to resume its normal flow within the crypts and causing rapid degradation of their occupants. Life support systems would shut down, while the canoptech constructs would enter emergency power conservation modes that severely limited their ability to perform maintenance. Some Tomb Worlds suffered partial awakening events when their monitoring systems malfunctioned and triggered premature revival protocols. These incidents typically resulted in confused and disoriented Necrons, emerging into damaged or partially collapsed complexes, their consciousness matrices struggling to process their surroundings after millions of years in stasis. Without proper command hierarchies or functioning support systems, these awakened warriors often fell into mindless repetition of their last programmed instructions, patrolling empty corridors or standing guard over long abandoned positions. The lucky few who retained enough awareness to understand their situation faced the grim choice of attempting to repair their Tomb World systems or entering stasis once again to await proper awakening. The degradation of some Necron dynasties became apparent through the gradual failure of their Tomb World's communication networks. These quantum entanglement arrays were designed to maintain contact between different installations within a dynasty's territory, allowing for coordinated awakening and strategic planning when the Great Sleep finally ended. As individual nodes failed or fell silent, the networks began to fragment, leaving isolated Tomb Worlds cut off from their parent dynasties. This isolation had profound implications for the eventual awakening, as it meant that many Necron forces would emerge without knowledge of their allies' status or the overall strategic situation. The most severely affected dynasties were those whose Tomb Worlds had been constructed in regions that later became unstable due to warp storms or other cosmic phenomena. The gradual expansion of the Eye of Terror and similar anomalies claimed several major installations, their reality warping effects proving too much for even Necron technology to withstand. Other Tomb Worlds were discovered and plundered by younger races who had no understanding of what they had found, their crude excavation methods causing irreparable damage to delicate stasis systems. A few installations fell victim to natural disasters of unprecedented scale, including supernovae that sterilized entire systems and black hole formations that consumed everything within their event horizons. Yet even as some Tomb Worlds failed, others remained perfectly preserved, their systems functioning with mechanical precision throughout the long ages of sleep. These successful installations became time capsules that preserved not only their Necron occupants, but also detailed records of the galaxy as it had existed during the war in heaven. Their databanks contained star charts showing the positions of long-dead civilizations, technological specifications for weapons that could crack planets, and strategic analyses of conflicts that had ended before the first primitive life forms had crawled from Earth's primordial oceans. The monitoring systems installed within each Tomb World continued their patient vigil throughout the Great Sleep, tracking the gradual recovery of galactic civilization with mechanical persistence. These sensor networks were marvels of engineering that could detect everything from the electromagnetic signatures of developing technologies to the psychic emanations of emerging psyker populations. Sophisticated analysis protocols evaluated each piece of data according to predetermined criteria, looking for signs that the galaxy had recovered sufficiently to warrant Necron intervention. The criteria for awakening varied between different dynasties and individual Tomb Worlds, reflecting the diverse goals and priorities of their inhabitants. Some installations were programmed to activate when local stellar populations reached specific energy output levels, indicating the presence of advanced civilizations capable of serving as either subjects or threats. Others monitored for the development of particular technologies, such as faster-than-light travel or directed energy weapons, that would suggest the emergence of spacefaring cultures. The most aggressive tomb worlds were set to awaken at the first signs of significant military activity, their occupants eager to test themselves against whatever new civilizations had arisen during their absence. As the millennia passed and the galaxy slowly recovered from the devastation of the war in heaven, these monitoring systems began to detect increasingly significant developments. The emergence of the Eldar as a major galactic power triggered awakening protocols in several tomb worlds, though most of these early revivals were limited to small scouting forces rather than full dynasty activation. The rise of the Orc empires caused similar stirrings, as automated systems recognized the familiar biosignatures of the ancient Krork and flagged them as potential threats requiring immediate attention. The most significant awakening triggers came with the emergence of humanity as a spacefaring civilization. The rapid expansion of human colonies during the Dark Age of technology set off alarms throughout the tomb world networks, as monitoring systems detected the telltale signatures of advanced terraforming equipment and stellar engineering projects. The psychic awakening that accompanied humanity's development was equally significant, as it represented a fundamental change in the galaxy's spiritual landscape that many tomb worlds had been programmed to recognize as a critical threshold. The age of strife that followed humanity's golden age provided additional awakening stimuli, as the collapse of human civilization created power vacuums that automated systems identified as opportunities for Necron expansion. Warp storms and demon incursions registered as reality distortions that required investigation, while the birth of Slaanesh sent psychic shockwaves throughout the galaxy that activated emergency protocols in dozens of tomb worlds. The subsequent rise of the Imperium of Man triggered even more widespread awakening events, as the Emperor's Great Crusade represented exactly the kind of large-scale military expansion that many Necron dynasties had been waiting to challenge. By the time the 41st millennium dawned, tomb worlds throughout the galaxy were beginning to stir with increasing frequency. The constant warfare that characterized the era provided a steady stream of awakening triggers, from the massive battles of the Horus Heresy to the ongoing conflicts with Chaos, Orcs, and Tyranids. Each major galactic event sent ripples through the monitoring networks, causing dormant systems to evaluate whether the time had finally come to end the Great Sleep and reclaim their ancient dominion over the stars. The first stirrings of what would become the galaxy-wide Necron awakening began not within the tomb worlds themselves, but in the cold void beyond the galactic rim where Zarek, the last silent king of the Necron dynasties, had exiled himself in the aftermath of the Great Sleep. While his subjects slumbered in their sepulchral chambers, dreaming mechanical dreams of conquest and revenge, their former sovereign had chosen a different path entirely. Unable to bear the weight of his people's transformation and his role in their enslavement to the Khatan, Zarek had departed the galaxy entirely, taking with him only his personal guard and a handful of loyal retainers aboard vessels designed for the longest of journeys. The exile had lasted for millions of years, during which the Silent King had wandered the intergalactic void in search of something that might restore meaning to his cursed existence. His fleet had explored dead galaxies where ancient civilizations had collapsed into dust, investigated cosmic phenomena that defied understanding, and encountered alien species so removed from galactic life that they existed as pure energy or crystallized thought. Through it all, Zarek had carried the burden of his people's fate, knowing that somewhere behind him lay millions of tomb worlds filled with warriors who had once been living beings with hopes, dreams, and souls. The transformation that biotransference had wrought upon the Necrontyr remained the Silent King's greatest source of anguish. He retained enough of his original consciousness to remember what his people had been before their mechanical rebirth, when they had possessed the full spectrum of emotions and the creative spark that had driven them to challenge the Old Ones despite their physical limitations. The hollow mockeries that had emerged from the biotransference chambers bore the memories and basic personality patterns of their former selves, but they were shadows cast by extinct flames, lacking the essential spark that had made them truly alive. Zarek's own condition was perhaps the cruelest irony of all. As the Silent King, he had been granted greater autonomy and awareness than his subjects, retaining enough free will to understand the magnitude of what had been lost while being powerless to undo it. His consciousness remained sharp and clear, unclouded by the programming that had reduced most Necrons to automatons, but this clarity only served to highlight the emptiness that surrounded him. He could remember the taste of food, the warmth of sunlight on living flesh, and the complex interplay of emotions that had once driven Necrontyr society, yet he could experience none of these things in his mechanical form. The vastness of intergalactic space had provided Zarek with ample time for contemplation and regret. His fleet had encountered the remnants of civilizations that had faced their own extinction events, some through warfare, others through natural disasters or the simple passage of time. Each discovery had served as a reminder of the fragility of life and the permanence of death, concepts that had taken on new meaning for one who existed in a state between the two. The Silent King had witnessed the birth and death of stars, the collision of galaxies, and the slow heat death of entire cosmic regions, all while remaining trapped within his immortal mechanical shell. It was during one of these long vigils in the void between galaxies that Zarek's sensors first detected something that would fundamentally alter his perspective on existence and his responsibilities to his sleeping people. The readings were initially dismissed by his ship's analytical systems as background cosmic radiation or the electromagnetic signature of a distant pulsar, but continued observation revealed patterns that suggested something far more significant and terrifying. The approaching signals bore the unmistakable characteristics of a vast biological migration, but one unlike anything in the Silent King's extensive databases. The electromagnetic patterns suggested creatures of enormous size, moving in coordinated formations across intergalactic distances, their bioelectric fields creating interference patterns that could be detected across millions of light years. More disturbing still were the psychic emanations that accompanied these signals, a constant background whisper of alien hunger that seemed to permeate the void itself. As Zarek's fleet moved to investigate these anomalous readings, the true scope of what they had discovered began to emerge. The signals originated from massive bioships, living vessels the size of small moons that pulsed with their own internal rhythms and glowed with bioluminescent patterns that served as some form of communication between the fleet elements. These creatures moved with purpose and intelligence, following trajectories that would bring them into contact with the galaxy that the Silent King had abandoned so long ago. The first direct encounter between Zarek's forces and the approaching Tyranid Hive fleet occurred in the void between the Milky Way and its nearest satellite galaxy. The bioships that his scouts engaged were unlike anything in Necron tactical databases, their hulls composed of living chitin that could regenerate from damage while simultaneously adapting to new threats. The weapons they deployed were equally alien, firing projectiles that were themselves living organisms designed to burrow through armor and consume their targets from within. The battle that followed was brief but illuminating, as Zarek's forces quickly withdrew rather than risk a prolonged engagement. The tactical data gathered during the encounter revealed capabilities that sent chills through even the Silent King's mechanical consciousness. The Tyranid organisms demonstrated an ability to rapidly adapt to Necron weapons and tactics, with subsequent waves of attackers showing resistance to energy types that had proven effective against their predecessors. More disturbing still was their apparent immunity to the fear and morale effects that Necron presence typically induced in organic beings, suggesting a level of single-minded purpose that transcended normal biological limitations. Subsequent observations of the approaching Hive fleets revealed the true magnitude of the threat they represented. The bioships traveled in formations that stretched across light years, their numbers defying easy calculation. Each fleet appeared to be a self-contained ecosystem, capable of consuming entire star systems and converting their biomass into additional ships and organisms. The psychic emanations that surrounded these fleets created what the Silent King's analysts termed a shadow in the warp, a phenomenon that disrupted faster-than-light communication and navigation across vast regions of space. The implications of this discovery struck Zarek with the force of a revelation. The Tyranids represented something that the Necrons had never before encountered in their long history, a threat to existence itself that made no distinction between organic and mechanical life. Their hunger was absolute and indiscriminate, consuming everything in their path regardless of its nature or origin. Planets stripped of their biomass would be rendered uninhabitable for any form of life, while the minerals and metals extracted during the consumption process would be incorporated into new bioships and weapons. For the first time since the Great Sleep had begun, the Silent King found himself contemplating the possibility of true extinction for his people. The Tyranids' ability to consume entire star systems meant that even the most well-hidden tomb worlds would eventually be discovered and devoured. The living metal that composed Necron bodies and technology would prove no barrier to organisms that could digest neutronium and metabolize exotic matter. Worse still, the consumption process would deny the Necrons any possibility of eventual resurrection or restoration, as their consciousness matrices would be broken down into component atoms and incorporated into Tyranid biomass. The realization that the Great Devourer posed an existential threat to all life in the galaxy, including the mechanical existence of his people, forced Zarek to confront the responsibilities he had abandoned when he fled into exile. The tomb worlds scattered throughout the galaxy contained not just sleeping warriors, but the last remnants of a civilization that had once spanned the stars. Each crypt held memories and knowledge that stretched back to the galaxy's youth, preserving fragments of cultures and sciences that had been lost for millions of years. If the Tyranids succeeded in their consumption of the galaxy, all of this would be lost forever, leaving the universe poorer for their passing. The Silent King's decision to return was not made lightly or quickly. The prospect of awakening his people to face a threat that might prove insurmountable was daunting enough, but the knowledge that he would be condemning them to another cycle of warfare and death weighed heavily upon his consciousness. Yet the alternative was even more unacceptable. Allowing the Tyranids to consume the galaxy unopposed would mean the final extinction of everything the Necrontyr had ever been or might become. The journey back to the galaxy took several centuries, as Zarek's fleet had to navigate cosmic phenomena and gravitational anomalies that had shifted during his long absence. The Silent King used this time to plan his approach carefully, analyzing the data his scouts had gathered about the galaxy's current state and the various civilizations that had emerged during the Necron's slumber. The rise of humanity was particularly noteworthy, as their rapid expansion and technological development suggested they might prove useful allies or dangerous enemies depending on how first contact was handled. Upon reaching the galactic rim, Zarek's first priority was establishing contact with the tomb worlds under his direct authority. The quantum communication networks that linked the various Necron dynasties had degraded significantly during the Great Sleep, with many nodes failing or falling silent over the millennia. The Silent King's own royal crypts, hidden within the Sodek dynasty's core territories, had maintained better connectivity than most, but even these systems required extensive repair and recalibration before they could support galaxy-wide coordination. The process of awakening began with the most critical installations first, those tomb worlds that contained the infrastructure and personnel necessary to support larger revival operations. Zarek's personal command ship established orbit around each facility in turn, its powerful transmitters broadcasting the authentication codes and awakening protocols that would rouse the sleeping nobles and their retinues. The sight of these ancient complexes stirring to life after millions of years was both magnificent and terrible, as massive doors ground open and the green glow of Necron technology began to emanate from previously dark chambers. The first Necrons to emerge from the Great Sleep were Zarek's most trusted lieutenants and advisors, individuals who had retained enough autonomy to understand the gravity of their situation and the challenges that lay ahead. These awakened nobles brought with them detailed knowledge of their respective dynasties' resources and capabilities, information that the Silent King would need to coordinate an effective response to the Tyranid threat. Many reported significant degradation in their tomb world systems, with some installations having suffered complete failures that left entire legions of warriors beyond revival. As more tomb worlds came online, a clearer picture of the galaxy's current state began to emerge through their monitoring systems and recent observations. The Imperium of Man had become the dominant power in the galaxy, their territories spanning millions of worlds, and their military forces engaged in constant warfare against a variety of threats. The Orc empires had grown and fragmented repeatedly, creating a patchwork of warring factions that consumed vast resources while producing little of strategic value. The Eldar had retreated to their craftworlds and hidden enclaves, their once mighty empire reduced to scattered remnants struggling for survival. Most significantly, the first Tyranid hive fleets had already begun their assault on the galaxy's eastern fringe, consuming entire systems and leaving dead worlds in their wake. The Imperium's response to these incursions had been characteristically brutal, but ultimately ineffective, their conventional military doctrine proving inadequate against an enemy that could adapt to their tactics in real time. The reports from Imperial worlds that had faced Tyranid invasion painted a picture of total devastation that confirmed Zarek's worst fears about the threat these creatures represented. The Silent King's reconnaissance missions expanded as more tomb worlds came online, with scouting forces dispatched to observe key strategic locations and assess the capabilities of the galaxy's current inhabitants. These operations were conducted with extreme caution, as premature revelation of the Necrons' return could trigger coordinated responses from multiple factions before the dynasties were fully prepared for large-scale warfare. The scouts reported back with detailed intelligence on Imperial military installations, Orc strongholds, Eldar movements, and most importantly, the advance elements of approaching Tyranid hive fleets. The data gathered during these reconnaissance operations revealed a galaxy that had changed dramatically during the Necrons' absence, but one that remained fundamentally familiar in its patterns of conflict and competition. The younger races had developed impressive technologies and military capabilities, but they remained bound by the same limitations that had defined galactic warfare for millions of years. Their weapons, while formidable, operated within understood parameters of physics and engineering. Their tactics, though refined through millennia of experience, followed predictable patterns based on biological and psychological factors that Necron's strategic doctrine had long since cataloged and countered. The Tyranids, however, represented something genuinely new and unprecedented in the galaxy's long history of warfare. Their ability to rapidly adapt and evolve in response to new threats made conventional military planning extremely difficult, while their complete immunity to negotiation or diplomacy meant that only total victory or total defeat were possible outcomes. The Silent King's analysis of Tyranid capabilities suggested that no single faction currently active in the galaxy possessed the resources or knowledge necessary to halt their advance permanently. This assessment led Zarek to a conclusion that would have profound implications for the galaxy's future. The Necrons could not face the Tyranid threat alone, nor could they afford to allow the other galactic powers to fall to the Great Devourer before mounting their own resistance. The preservation of life in the galaxy, even organic life that the Necrons had once sought to exterminate, had become a strategic necessity for their own survival. The irony was not lost on the Silent King that his people, who had spent millions of years dreaming of reclaiming their dominion over the living, now found themselves in the position of having to protect that same life from total annihilation. The awakening protocols that the Silent King had initiated began to cascade throughout the galaxy as tomb worlds responded to authentication codes that had not been transmitted for 60 million years. The process was neither uniform nor simultaneous, as each installation operated according to its own parameters and the varying degrees of degradation that had accumulated during the Great Sleep. Some dynasties emerged with their hierarchies intact and their systems functioning at near optimal capacity, while others faced the grim reality of catastrophic failures that had reduced once mighty legions to scattered remnants of their former glory. The Mandragora tomb world, buried beneath the surface of a world that Imperial cartographers had designated as a minor mining planet, exemplified the successful preservation of Necron power structures. The installation's awakening began with the activation of its primary power core, a massive Gauss reactor that had drawn energy from the planet's molten core for millions of years. As power flowed through conduits of living metal, the tomb's monitoring systems began their assessment protocols, scanning thousands of stasis crypts to determine which occupants could be safely revived and which had suffered irreparable damage during their long slumber. The Mandragora complex housed elements of the Mephrit dynasty, whose warriors had specialized in solar-powered weaponry and stellar engineering during the War in Heaven. Their overlord, Kutlak the World Killer, had been among the first to undergo biotransference and retained significant autonomy within his mechanical form. As his sarcophagus began the revival sequence, quantum field generators gradually restored normal temporal flow, while neural interface systems reactivated his consciousness matrix. The process took several hours, during which Kutlak's awareness slowly expanded from the basic operational parameters that had sustained him during stasis to the full spectrum of tactical and strategic thinking that had made him one of the dynasty's most feared commanders. The first sensations that registered in Kutlak's consciousness were the familiar harmonics of Necron technology, the low-frequency hum of Gauss reactors, the crystalline chiming of quantum processors, and the subtle electromagnetic signatures that indicated the presence of other awakening nobles. His optical sensors activated with characteristic green luminescence, revealing the interior of his crypt chamber with its walls of living metal and the intricate hieroglyphs that recorded his achievements during the ancient wars. The sight of these familiar surroundings provided a measure of continuity that helped orient his consciousness after the vast emptiness of the Great Sleep. As Kutlak's systems completed their activation sequence, he became aware of similar processes occurring throughout the tomb complex. The quantum communication network that linked the various chambers began relaying status reports from other awakening nobles, each transmission carrying authentication codes and operational parameters that confirmed their successful revival. The data streams revealed that approximately 70% of the tomb's inhabitants had survived the Great Sleep intact, while another 20% had suffered varying degrees of consciousness degradation that would require extensive repair work to correct. The remaining 10% had been lost entirely, their consciousness matrices having succumbed to quantum decay or catastrophic system failures that left their bodies as empty shells of living metal. These casualties represented not just military assets, but irreplaceable fragments of Necron-tier culture and memory, individuals who had carried forward traditions and knowledge from before the biotransference. Their loss was a sobering reminder of the price that the Great Sleep had extracted from the dynasty, even from those installations that had functioned relatively well. Kutlak's first priority upon full awakening was to assess the tomb world's defensive capabilities and the current state of the planet above. The monitoring systems that had maintained their vigil during the Great Sleep provided detailed reports on the human colony that had been established on the surface, complete with population estimates, technological assessments, and tactical evaluations of their military capabilities. The humans had unknowingly built their primary settlement directly above one of the tomb's main entrances, their mining operations having come within meters of breaching the outer defensive perimeter on several occasions. The irony of the situation was not lost on the Necron Overlord. These short-lived organic creatures had spent generations extracting minerals from the very world that housed one of the galaxy's most ancient and powerful civilizations, completely unaware of the sleeping giants beneath their feet. Their mining equipment, primitive by Necron standards but impressive for their technological level, had actually strengthened the tomb's concealment by creating a network of tunnels and caverns that masked the artificial nature of the deeper structures. Similar awakening events were occurring throughout the galaxy as other major tomb worlds responded to the Silent King's activation codes. The Sodek dynasty's primary installation on the world of Davatas experienced a remarkably smooth revival process, with Emotic the Stormlord emerging from his stasis, crypt with his tactical brilliance intact and his ambitions undimmed by the long sleep. His first actions upon awakening involved a comprehensive assessment of his dynasty's resources and the strategic situation throughout his traditional territories. The data that Emotic's awakening systems provided painted a complex picture of galactic development during the Necrons' absence. The Imperium of Man had established colonies throughout what had once been Sodic territory, their worlds fortified with defensive installations and protected by naval patrols that followed predictable routes between major population centers. The humans had also encountered and cataloged several dormant tomb worlds, though their limited understanding of Necron technology had prevented them from recognizing the true nature of these installations. Emotic's analysis of Imperial military doctrine revealed both strengths and weaknesses that could be exploited during the coming conflicts. Human forces demonstrated impressive coordination and logistical capabilities, with their ability to rapidly deploy reinforcements across interstellar distances representing a significant tactical advantage. Their weapons technology, while crude compared to Necron equivalents, had achieved sufficient sophistication to pose genuine threats to lightly armored targets. Most importantly, their psychers provided capabilities that could potentially disrupt Necron communications and targeting systems if not properly countered. The awakening process was not without its complications, as many tomb worlds discovered that their monitoring systems had malfunctioned or been damaged during the Great Sleep. The Navok dynasty's primary installation experienced cascading system failures when its main power core attempted to activate after millions of years of dormancy. The resulting energy surge overloaded several critical subsystems and caused premature awakening of nearly 1,000 warriors before their consciousness matrices had been properly stabilized. These prematurely awakened Necrons emerged in various states of disorientation and malfunction, their tactical programming corrupted by incomplete revival sequences. Some reverted to their most basic combat protocols, standing guard over empty chambers or patrolling corridors that led nowhere. Others became trapped in repetitive behavior loops, endlessly performing maintenance tasks or reciting tactical doctrines from conflicts that had ended millions of years ago. The most severely affected warriors suffered complete personality dissolution, their consciousness matrices fragmenting into disconnected memory fragments that left them as little more than animated automatons. The coordination challenges faced by awakening dynasties became apparent as they attempted to re-establish contact with other Necron installations throughout the galaxy. The quantum communication networks that had once linked tomb worlds across vast distances had suffered extensive degradation during the Great Sleep, with many relay stations having failed or fallen silent over the millennia. This isolation meant that individual overlords were awakening to find themselves cut off from their traditional allies and uncertain about the status of neighboring dynasties. The Nihilak dynasty's attempts to contact their historical allies in the Mefrit and Sodek dynasties met with frustrating silence, as the communication arrays that should have carried their signals had been disrupted by stellar phenomena and cosmic events that had occurred during their slumber. Solar flares, gravitational anomalies, and the gradual drift of stellar positions had combined to render many of the original communication protocols obsolete, forcing the awakening Necrons to rely on slower and less reliable methods of long-range contact. These communication difficulties were compounded by the discovery that several major tomb worlds had been completely destroyed during the Great Sleep. The Ogdobic dynasty's primary installation had been consumed when its host star underwent an unexpected supernova event, while the Kara dynasty's core territories had been overrun by a warp storm that had persisted for several million years. The loss of these installations represented not just military setbacks, but the complete extinction of entire branches of Necron civilization, their unique cultures and tactical doctrines erased forever. The first conflicts between awakening Necrons and Imperial forces occurred almost immediately, as tomb worlds began asserting control over their immediate surroundings. The human colonists on Mandragora discovered the true nature of their world when Cutlax's forces began emerging from concealed entrances that had been hidden beneath mining installations and agricultural facilities. The initial encounters were brief and one-sided, as Imperial Guard units equipped with conventional weapons found themselves facing enemies that could regenerate from seemingly fatal damage while wielding technology that defied their understanding of physics. The Imperial response to these early Necron incursions followed predictable patterns that had been refined through millennia of warfare against various alien threats. Distress signals were transmitted to sector command centers, requesting immediate reinforcement and tactical support. Local PDF forces were mobilized to establish defensive perimeters around major population centers, while civilian evacuation procedures were implemented in areas deemed most vulnerable to alien attack. The Adeptus Mechanicus dispatched technical specialists to analyze recovered Necron technology, though their initial reports were filled with references to machine spirits and blessed mechanisms that demonstrated their fundamental misunderstanding of what they were examining. The Necrons' own tactical assessments of these early engagements revealed the extent to which galactic warfare had evolved during their absence. Imperial forces demonstrated impressive discipline and coordination, with their officers adapting quickly to the unique challenges posed by enemies that could phase through solid matter or regenerate from catastrophic damage. Their heavy weapons, while insufficient to permanently destroy Necron warriors, proved capable of causing enough damage to trigger reanimation protocols and temporarily remove targets from combat effectiveness. More concerning from the Necron perspective was the speed with which Imperial forces could call upon specialized assets to counter specific threats. Psykers attached to guard regiments began developing techniques for disrupting Necron phase technology, while tech priests modified their weapons to produce electromagnetic pulses that could interfere with quantum matrices. The Imperium's vast bureaucratic apparatus, often criticized for its inefficiency, demonstrated its value by rapidly disseminating tactical intelligence about Necron capabilities to forces throughout the affected sectors. The awakening process continued to accelerate as more tomb worlds came online and began coordinating their activities. The Zarekan dynasty's installations, responding to direct commands from the Silent King himself, achieved higher success rates in their revival procedures and demonstrated better preservation of pre-sleep command structures. These tomb worlds became coordination centers for smaller installations in their regions, providing technical support for damaged systems and strategic guidance for newly awakened overlords who found themselves isolated from their traditional hierarchies. The emergence of Necron forces throughout the galaxy created a complex strategic situation that defied easy categorization. Unlike previous alien invasions that had followed predictable patterns of expansion and conquest, the Necron awakening represented the simultaneous activation of thousands of independent power centers, each with its own objectives and territorial claims. Some dynasties focused on reclaiming worlds that had been part of their ancient domains, while others pursued aggressive expansion into regions that offered strategic advantages or valuable resources. The lack of unified command structure among the awakening dynasties created both opportunities and challenges for their enemies. Imperial forces found themselves facing multiple independent threats that required different tactical approaches, as each dynasty had developed its own preferred methods of warfare during the War in Heaven. The Mefrit dynasty's emphasis on solar-powered weaponry made them particularly dangerous during daylight operations, but somewhat less effective in void combat, while the Navak dynasty's focus on close combat excellence created tactical situations that favored defensive positions and prepared killing fields. As the initial phase of the awakening progressed, it became clear that the galaxy was entering a new age of warfare that would reshape the balance of power among its various factions. The Necrons brought with them technologies and strategic doctrines that had been refined through conflicts of unimaginable scope and duration, yet they also faced the challenge of adapting to a galaxy that had changed dramatically during their absence. The civilizations they now encountered possessed capabilities and knowledge that had not existed during the war in heaven, creating tactical situations that required new approaches and innovative solutions. The Tomb Worlds continued their patient work of revival and reconstruction. Their canoptech constructs laboring to repair the damage accumulated during 60 million years of dormancy, while their awakening inhabitants began the complex process of reassessing their place in a transformed galaxy. Each successful activation brought new warriors and war machines back to operational status, steadily building the strength that would be needed for the conflicts to come. The ancient dynasties were stirring, and their awakening would herald changes that would echo throughout the galaxy for millennia to come. The awakening of the Maynarch dynasty marked one of the most disturbing chapters in the galaxy's encounter with the returning Necrons. Unlike other dynasties that focused on territorial reclamation or strategic resource acquisition, the Maynarch had developed an obsession that set them apart from their peers: the systematic harvesting of living beings for grotesque experimentation and research. Their tomb worlds, scattered throughout what Imperial records designated as the Orpheus sector, had maintained sophisticated biological monitoring systems throughout the Great Sleep, tracking the evolution and development of organic life with mechanical patience. The Maynarch dynasty's particular fixation on living subjects stemmed from their unique response to the curse of biotransference. While other Necron nobles had accepted their mechanical existence as the price of victory over the Old Ones, the Maynarch leadership had never abandoned hope of reversing the process that had stripped away their souls and flesh. Their pharaoh, Zunbacker the Maker of Sorrows, had been among the most brilliant biotechnicians of the ancient Necron tier, and his transformation into a mechanical form had only intensified his obsession with the mysteries of organic life. The dynasty's tomb worlds had been constructed with extensive biological research facilities, vast underground laboratories equipped with stasis chambers, dissection tables, and experimental apparatus that could sustain living subjects for extended periods of study. These installations had remained powered throughout the Great Sleep, their automated systems conducting preliminary analysis of any organic life forms that came within range of their sensors. The data accumulated over millions of years had created comprehensive databases of biological development patterns, genetic drift, and evolutionary adaptations that would prove invaluable to their research efforts. When the awakening protocols reached the Maynarch tomb worlds, the revival process proceeded with characteristic efficiency. Zunbacker emerged from his stasis crypt to find his laboratories fully operational, and his research data updated with millions of years of biological observations. The organic life forms that had evolved on the worlds above his tomb complexes had been cataloged and analyzed in exhaustive detail, their genetic structures mapped, and their physiological processes documented with mechanical precision. The pharaoh's first priority upon awakening was to assess the current state of biological research throughout his domain. The monitoring systems had detected the arrival of human colonists in the Orpheus sector several millennia earlier, and their presence represented an unprecedented opportunity for live specimen acquisition. These humans possessed genetic templates that were significantly different from the primitive organisms that had previously inhabited the region, offering new avenues for research into the fundamental nature of organic consciousness and its relationship to what the Necron tier had once called the soul. The Orpheus sector itself had become a thriving region of Imperial space during the Necron's slumber, with dozens of worlds supporting populations that ranged from agricultural colonies to industrial centers. The sector's strategic importance to the Imperium lay in its position along major shipping lanes that connected the core worlds with frontier territories, making it a vital link in the vast logistical network that sustained Imperial civilization. The human populations had established themselves with characteristic determination, terraforming marginal worlds and extracting resources from asteroid belts and gas giant moons. Zunbacker's analysis of Imperial colonization patterns revealed systematic approaches to planetary development that demonstrated impressive organizational capabilities. The humans had established redundant supply chains, defensive installations at key strategic points, and communication networks that could coordinate activities across multiple star systems. Their military forces followed doctrine that emphasized rapid response to threats and the concentration of firepower at decisive points, tactics that would need to be carefully considered during the harvest operations. The Maynarch dynasty's approach to reclaiming their territory differed significantly from the direct conquest strategies employed by other awakening Necron forces. Rather than launching immediate attacks on Imperial installations, they began with careful observation and specimen collection, using their advanced cloaking technology to remain undetected while gathering intelligence about human biology and behavior patterns. Specialized harvest teams equipped with capture devices and stasis fields began operating throughout the sector, targeting isolated settlements and individual humans who could be taken without triggering large-scale alarm responses. The first harvest operations focused on remote agricultural colonies where small populations lived in relative isolation from Imperial authority. These settlements typically housed a few hundred individuals engaged in food production or resource extraction, their isolation making them ideal targets for covert specimen acquisition. Maynarch raiding parties would approach under cover of darkness, their wraith-like forms phasing through defensive barriers and security systems with contemptuous ease. The harvest teams employed sophisticated biotechnology that could render their targets unconscious without causing permanent damage to their biological systems. Neural disruptor fields would overwhelm human nervous systems, inducing immediate catatonia while preserving brain function and memory integrity. Stasis capsules would then maintain the subjects in perfect biological suspension during transport to the dynasty's research facilities, ensuring that no degradation occurred between capture and analysis. The disappearances initially attracted little attention from Imperial authorities, as frontier colonies frequently faced threats from local wildlife, equipment failures, or simple accidents that could account for missing personnel. The Maynarch's careful selection of targets and their practice of leaving no obvious traces of alien intervention meant that months passed before patterns began to emerge in the missing person reports. Even when Imperial investigators began to suspect coordinated hostile action, their initial theories focused on human raiders or Xenos species that were already known to operate in the region. As the harvest operations expanded, the Maynarch dynasty began establishing what they termed cultivation worlds throughout the Orpheus sector. These installations were built on planets that had been identified as suitable for large-scale biological research, their surfaces transformed into vast laboratory complexes surrounded by containment facilities for living subjects. The construction process involved the deployment of massive canoptech swarms that could reshape entire continents according to Necron specifications, their molecular manipulation capabilities allowing them to create structures that would have taken human engineers centuries to complete. The cultivation worlds represented the pinnacle of Necron biotechnology, combining advanced research equipment with containment systems that could house millions of living subjects simultaneously. Each facility was designed to maintain optimal conditions for biological research, with atmospheric processors that could adjust environmental parameters to match the requirements of different species, gravity generators that could simulate various planetary conditions, and nutrient distribution systems that could sustain complex ecosystems indefinitely. The research conducted within these facilities focused on understanding the fundamental mechanisms that distinguished living consciousness from mechanical intelligence. Zunbacher and his subordinates had developed theories suggesting that organic life possessed quantum properties that were somehow lost during the biotransference process, creating the hollow existence that characterized Necron consciousness. Their experiments involved detailed analysis of neural activity patterns, genetic manipulation to enhance or suppress specific biological functions, and attempts to isolate the quantum signatures that might represent the essence of organic souls. The Maynarch researchers discovered that human consciousness demonstrated remarkable complexity and adaptability, with neural pathways that could reorganize themselves in response to new stimuli or traumatic experiences. This neuroplasticity represented a fundamental difference from Necron consciousness matrices, which remained essentially static once their initial programming was established. The implications of this discovery suggested that organic brains possessed self-modification capabilities that might be key to understanding the nature of true consciousness. Experiments in genetic manipulation revealed additional insights into the relationship between biological structure and conscious experience. The Maynarch biotechnicians could modify human genetic templates to enhance specific cognitive functions or alter sensory capabilities, creating test subjects with expanded awareness or modified perception of reality. These enhanced humans demonstrated consciousness patterns that differed significantly from baseline templates, suggesting that the quantum signatures associated with organic souls could be artificially modified or amplified. The most ambitious research projects involved attempts to transfer organic consciousness into mechanical substrates without the destructive effects that had characterized the original biotransference process. These experiments required sophisticated quantum field generators that could preserve the delicate neural patterns associated with organic thought while translating them into formats compatible with Necron technology. The initial results were encouraging, with some subjects retaining significant portions of their original personality and memory during the transfer process. However, the transferred consciousness patterns remained fundamentally different from those of naturally occurring Necron matrices, retaining emotional responses and creative capabilities that had been lost during the ancient biotransference. These hybrid consciousness forms demonstrated the ability to experience genuine emotions, form new memories, and adapt to changing circumstances in ways that pure Necron consciousness could not achieve. The implications suggested that the original biotransference process had been flawed in fundamental ways that the Catan had either not understood or deliberately concealed from their Necron servants. The expansion of Maynarch operations throughout the Orpheus sector eventually attracted the attention of Imperial authorities as the scale of disappearances became impossible to ignore. Entire settlements had vanished without trace, their populations simply gone with no evidence of struggle or evacuation. The few survivors who had witnessed Maynarch raids described attackers that seemed to phase in and out of reality, their forms shifting between solid matter and translucent energy as they moved through defensive positions with impossible speed and coordination. The Imperial response to these incidents followed established protocols for dealing with unknown Xenos threats. The Ordo Xenos dispatched Inquisitor teams to investigate the disappearances, while the Imperial Guard began reinforcing defensive positions throughout the sector. The Adeptus Mechanicus contributed technical analysis of the few physical traces left behind by the raiders, though their initial reports struggled to explain the advanced technology signatures that had been detected at several incident sites. Among the awakening Necron dynasties, none emerged from the Great Sleep with their hierarchies more intact or their strategic vision more focused than the Sodek dynasty. Their primary tomb world on Davadas had weathered the long millennia with remarkable preservation, its systems maintaining optimal function while its inhabitants slumbered in their crypts. When the activation protocols reached this ancient installation, the revival process proceeded with mechanical precision, awakening tier after tier of nobles and warriors in perfect accordance with the dynasty's traditional command structure. At the apex of this hierarchy stood Imodic the Stormlord Pharaon of the Sodek dynasty, and perhaps the most tactically gifted commander among all the awakened Necron nobility. His emergence from stasis marked the return of a strategic mind that had orchestrated some of the most devastating campaigns of the war in heaven, a military genius whose understanding of warfare transcended the conventional limitations that bound lesser commanders. The biotransference process had preserved not only his consciousness, but also the brilliant tactical acumen that had earned him recognition, even among the Catan, as a commander worthy of respect. Imodic's first actions upon awakening demonstrated the methodical approach that characterized his command philosophy. Rather than immediately launching military operations against the younger races that had colonized former Sodic territory, he initiated comprehensive intelligence gathering protocols designed to provide complete situational awareness of the galaxy's current state. His Tomb World's monitoring systems had accumulated 60 million years of observational data, but this information required careful analysis and correlation before it could be transformed into actionable strategic intelligence. The data streams that flowed through the Stormlord's consciousness revealed a galaxy that had changed dramatically during the Necrons' absence, yet one that remained fundamentally predictable in its patterns of conflict and expansion. The Imperium of Man had established itself as the dominant galactic power, their territories encompassing millions of worlds connected by shipping lanes, and defended by military forces that followed doctrine refined through 10,000 years of constant warfare. Their organizational capabilities impressed even Imodic's analytical mind, as the humans had achieved levels of coordination and logistical efficiency that rivaled those of the ancient Necrontyr Empire. The Orc presence throughout the galaxy presented a more familiar challenge, as these creatures remained essentially unchanged from the Krork that the Necrons had fought during the War in Heaven. Their tendency toward fragmentation and internecine warfare created tactical opportunities that could be exploited by a sufficiently clever commander, while their crude technology and predictable behavioral patterns made them ideal opponents for testing newly awakened Necron forces against live enemies. The massive Orc empire of Cheredin, sprawling across multiple sectors in what had once been Sodec space, represented both an immediate threat and a valuable training opportunity for the dynasty's military forces. Imodic's strategic assessment identified Cheredin as the primary obstacle to Sodec expansion in their traditional territories. The Orc Empire had grown to encompass dozens of star systems, its ramshackle fleets and crude installations scattered throughout regions that the dynasty considered their ancestral domain. The Orcs' presence was not merely a territorial inconvenience, but a fundamental insult to Necron concepts of order and proper hierarchy, their chaotic society representing everything that the methodical Sodec found repugnant about organic life. The Cheredin Empire itself had developed along typical Orc lines, with various warbands and clans competing for dominance, while maintaining loose allegiance to a series of powerful Wa leaders who had emerged over the centuries. Their military capabilities centered around overwhelming numbers and crude but effective weaponry, supported by an industrial base that could rapidly produce vehicles and equipment from salvaged materials. The Orcs' natural resilience and enthusiasm for combat made them formidable opponents in direct confrontation, but their lack of strategic coordination and tendency toward infighting created vulnerabilities that a skilled commander could exploit. The Stormlord's approach to the Cheredin problem demonstrated the innovative tactical thinking that had made him legendary among the Necron nobility. Rather than launching conventional assault operations against heavily defended Orc strongholds, he developed what would become known as the Lightning Strike Doctrine, a revolutionary approach to warfare that maximized the unique capabilities of Necron technology while minimizing exposure to enemy counterattacks. This doctrine emphasized rapid deployment of small, highly mobile forces capable of achieving specific tactical objectives before withdrawing to safety. The foundation of the Lightning Strike Doctrine lay in the Necrons' mastery of dimensional technology and their ability to manipulate space-time on tactical scales. Sodec forces could deploy directly onto target locations using quantum tunneling devices that bypassed conventional defenses entirely, while their ability to phase through solid matter allowed them to strike at objectives that would be impossible for conventional forces to reach. The doctrine called for simultaneous attacks on multiple targets, creating confusion and preventing effective enemy response while achieving maximum psychological impact. Imodic's first application of these tactics came during the assault on the Orc-held system of Korvac, a strategic location that controlled access to several important shipping lanes within the Cheredin Empire. The system's primary world housed a massive Orc industrial complex that produced weapons and vehicles for warbands throughout the region, making it a critical target whose destruction would significantly impact the Empire's military capabilities. The planet's defenses included orbital platforms, surface-to-space missile batteries, and ground-based fortifications that would normally require extensive siege operations to overcome. The Sodek attack began with the deployment of Deathmark assassin squads directly into the heart of the Orc industrial facilities. These specialized warriors materialized within critical infrastructure nodes, their dimensional oubliettes allowing them to bypass all external defenses and appear exactly where they could cause maximum damage. The Deathmark's hyperspace hunters were programmed with targeting data for key Orc leaders and technical specialists, eliminating command personnel and skilled workers whose loss would cripple the facility's operations. Simultaneously, immortal squads equipped with Tesla carbines appeared at strategic points throughout the complex, their weapons' electrical discharge effects proving particularly effective against Orc machinery and electronics. The Tesla weapons created cascading failures throughout the facility's power grid, while their ability to arc between multiple targets made them devastatingly effective against the tightly packed Orc work gangs. The electrical storms generated by concentrated Tesla fire created an atmosphere of supernatural terror that disrupted Orc morale and prevented effective coordination of defensive efforts. The third phase of the assault involved the deployment of Wraith constructs directly into the facility's most heavily defended sections. These ancient war machines phased through the crude Orc fortifications as if they were mere illusions, their particle whips and transdimensional beamers systematically dismantling defensive positions, while their Wraith sight allowed them to track enemies through solid barriers. The psychological effect of these ghostly attackers proved as devastating as their physical capabilities, as even the notoriously fearless Orcs found themselves unnerved by enemies that seemed to exist partially outside normal reality. The entire operation lasted less than 6 hours from initial deployment to final withdrawal, yet it achieved complete destruction of the Korvac industrial complex and eliminated several thousand Orc defenders. The Sodek forces suffered minimal casualties, with most losses occurring during the extraction phase when Orc reinforcements finally arrived from other parts of the system. The speed and precision of the attack left the surviving Orcs confused and demoralized, unable to understand how their supposedly impregnable fortress had been so thoroughly compromised. The success at Korvac established the template for subsequent Sodek operations throughout the Cheredin Empire. Emotic refined his lightning strike doctrine based on lessons learned during the initial assault, developing increasingly sophisticated deployment patterns and target selection criteria. His forces began operating in coordinated cells that could strike multiple objectives simultaneously, creating the impression of a much larger military presence while maintaining the mobility and stealth that made the doctrine effective. The psychological warfare aspects of these operations proved as important as their tactical success. The Orcs' crude communication networks spread exaggerated accounts of Necron capabilities, describing enemies that could appear from thin air and disappear just as quickly while wielding weapons that defied understanding. These stories created an atmosphere of supernatural dread that undermined Orc confidence and made their leaders increasingly paranoid about potential attacks. Some warbands began abandoning their positions entirely, retreating to more defensible locations, or simply fleeing the region altogether. The establishment of Mandragora as a major center of Sodek power represented Emotic's most ambitious project during the early phases of the dynasty's reawakening. This tomb world, strategically located within striking distance of multiple Imperial and Orc territories, possessed the infrastructure and defensive capabilities necessary to serve as a forward command center for extended military operations. The Stormlord ordered extensive modifications to the facility's existing systems, transforming it from a simple tomb complex into a sophisticated military headquarters capable of coordinating operations across multiple star systems. The expansion of Mandragora involved the construction of massive communication arrays that could maintain contact with Sotek forces throughout the galaxy, their quantum entanglement transmitters providing instantaneous coordination regardless of distance or interference. Advanced manufacturing facilities were established to produce specialized equipment and ammunition for the dynasty's unique tactical requirements, while expanded barracks and training areas could accommodate the growing numbers of warriors being awakened from other tomb worlds throughout Sotek territory. The tomb world's strategic location made it an ideal staging ground for operations against both Imperial and Orc targets, its position allowing rapid deployment to multiple theaters of conflict without requiring extensive logistical preparation. Imodic established forward operating bases on several nearby worlds, creating a network of support facilities that could sustain extended campaigns while providing fallback positions in case of tactical reversal. These installations were carefully concealed using advanced cloaking technology, their presence undetectable to enemy reconnaissance until Sotek forces chose to reveal themselves. The Stormlord's strategic vision extended far beyond simple territorial reclamation, encompassing long-term objectives that would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. His analysis of current galactic conditions suggested that the various younger races were locked in patterns of conflict that prevented any single faction from achieving decisive dominance, creating opportunities for a sufficiently clever commander to manipulate events to Necron advantage. Rather than simply conquering territory through direct military action, Imodic began developing plans that would use the existing conflicts to weaken his enemies while strengthening Sotek positions. The coordination between different Sotek tomb worlds improved dramatically as Imodic's communication networks came online and established contact with installations throughout the dynasty's traditional territories. These facilities had awakened with varying degrees of success, some emerging with their forces intact, while others had suffered significant losses during the Great Sleep. The Stormlord's first priority was assessing the overall strength of his dynasty and identifying which installations required immediate support to restore their operational capabilities. The tomb world of Geddon had suffered extensive damage to its primary power systems, leaving large sections of the facility without adequate energy to maintain stasis fields or operate essential systems. Imodic dispatched technical specialists and replacement components from Mandragora, their expertise allowing rapid restoration of critical functions, while Canoptech constructs worked to repair the accumulated damage. The successful rehabilitation of Geddon provided the dynasty with an additional base of operations and demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated support operations between different installations. Other tomb worlds presented different challenges that required creative solutions. The facility on Zapanek had maintained perfect technical function throughout the Great Sleep, but its awakening protocols had malfunctioned in ways that left significant portions of its garrison trapped in partial stasis. These warriors remained conscious, but unable to move or communicate normally, their consciousness matrices caught between full awakening and dormancy in ways that threatened permanent damage if not corrected quickly. Sotek technicians developed specialized revival procedures that could safely complete the awakening process, though the effort required careful coordination and precise timing to avoid catastrophic system failures. The integration of these restored facilities into Imodic's expanding network created a military infrastructure capable of supporting operations on a galactic scale. Each tomb world contributed unique capabilities and resources, from specialized manufacturing facilities to strategic weapons that had been preserved since the War in Heaven. The Stormlord's genius lay in his ability to coordinate these diverse assets into coherent strategic plans that maximized their effectiveness while minimizing vulnerabilities to enemy counteraction. The refinement of Necron warfare under Imodic's leadership introduced tactical innovations that would influence military doctrine throughout the awakening dynasties. His lightning strike methodology proved adaptable to a wide variety of operational requirements, from precision strikes against specific targets to larger campaigns involving multiple objectives and extended timelines. The key principles remained constant: maximum use of Necron technological advantages, minimal exposure to enemy counterattacks, and careful coordination between different force elements to achieve synergistic effects. The Sodek dynasty's expansion continued steadily as more tomb worlds came online and additional territories fell under Imodic's control. The Stormlord's reputation spread throughout the awakening Necron nobility, earning recognition as the preeminent military strategist of the New Age, and attracting offers of alliance from other dynasties seeking to benefit from his tactical expertise. Yet Imodic remained focused on his primary objectives: the complete reclamation of traditional Sodek territory and the establishment of his dynasty as the dominant power in their region of the galaxy. The ongoing conflicts with the Orc Empire of Cheredin provided valuable training opportunities for newly awakened Sodek forces, allowing them to test their capabilities against live enemies while refining their tactical doctrines. Each engagement generated data that could be analyzed and incorporated into future operations, creating a continuous improvement cycle that enhanced the dynasty's military effectiveness. The Orcs' predictable responses to Necron attacks made them ideal opponents for forces still adapting to warfare after 60 million years of dormancy, while their resilience and numbers ensured that the conflicts would continue long enough to provide extensive combat experience. The awakening of the Mefrit dynasty brought with it a terror that transcended conventional warfare, as these ancient Necrons possessed technologies that could manipulate the very stars themselves. Their tomb worlds, scattered throughout regions that would later become critical Imperial territories, had maintained sophisticated stellar monitoring systems throughout the Great Sleep, tracking solar activity and mapping gravitational anomalies with mechanical precision. When their revival protocols activated, the dynasty emerged with capabilities that would fundamentally challenge humanity's understanding of what was possible in galactic warfare. Pharaon Amontek, master of the Mefrit dynasty, had been among the most ambitious of the ancient Necrontyr nobility during the biotransference era. His fascination with stellar phenomena had driven him to develop weapons and technologies that drew their power directly from nearby stars, creating arsenals that could function at full capacity only when supplied with solar radiation. The Great Sleep had preserved not only these devastating weapons, but also the technical knowledge required to construct new installations capable of channeling stellar energy across interstellar distances. The dynasty's primary tomb world, buried beneath the surface of a planet orbiting a particularly active red giant star, had spent millions of years absorbing and storing solar radiation through massive collection arrays that extended deep into the planetary crust. These installations had continued their patient work throughout the long sleep, accumulating energy reserves that now powered the awakening process and provided the raw materials necessary for the dynasty's most ambitious projects. The stored power represented the accumulated output of an entire star system over geological ages, compressed into crystalline matrices that could release their energy on command. Amontek's first priority upon awakening was the assessment of stellar conditions throughout his traditional territories. The monitoring systems revealed that several star systems had undergone significant changes during the Great Sleep, with some stars entering new phases of their evolutionary cycles, while others had been artificially modified by the various younger races that had colonized the region. The Imperium of Man had established forge worlds around particularly stable stars, their massive industrial complexes drawing energy directly from stellar cores through technologies that, while crude by Necron standards, demonstrated an understanding of stellar engineering principles. The Mefrit dynasty's approach to reclaiming their territories differed markedly from the tactical innovations employed by other awakening Necron forces. Rather than relying on stealth or rapid deployment, they developed what their technical specialists termed stellar siege warfare, a methodology that used the target system's own star as the primary weapon against defending forces. This approach required extensive preparation and sophisticated equipment, but it offered the advantage of overwhelming firepower that could eliminate entire fleets or planetary populations without requiring large numbers of Necron warriors to achieve decisive results. The first demonstration of Mefrit stellar manipulation capabilities occurred in the Threx system, where Imperial Navy forces had established a major fleet anchorage around the system's outer gas giant. The installation served as a forward operating base for Imperial operations in the sector, its orbital shipyards and supply depots supporting dozens of vessels ranging from escort frigates to massive battleships. The system's primary star, a stable yellow dwarf, had shown no unusual activity for centuries, making it an ideal location for the extensive infrastructure that the Imperial Navy required for sustained operations. The Mefrit assault began with the deployment of solar pulse generators, massive devices that could be positioned at specific points within a star system to create resonance effects in the local stellar body. These generators, each the size of a small moon, were transported to the Threx system using the dynasty's most advanced tomb ships, their living metal hulls providing protection against the intense radiation encountered during close solar approaches. The positioning process required precise calculations of gravitational fields and solar wind patterns, as even minor errors could result in catastrophic equipment failures or unpredictable stellar reactions. The generators themselves represented the pinnacle of Necron stellar engineering, incorporating technologies that had been developed during the War in Heaven for use against the Old One's solar-powered installations. Each device contained quantum field projectors capable of creating artificial gravity wells within stellar plasma, while sophisticated harmonic resonators could induce specific oscillation patterns in nuclear fusion reactions. The combination of these systems allowed the generators to manipulate stellar output with unprecedented precision, creating focused energy discharges that could be directed at targets throughout the host system. The activation of the solar pulse generators produced immediate and dramatic effects on the Threx system's primary star. The stellar surface began exhibiting massive flare activity as the artificial resonance fields disrupted normal convection patterns within the star's outer layers. These solar flares, far more intense than anything the star had produced during its natural evolution, sent streams of charged particles racing outward from the stellar surface at velocities approaching significant fractions of light speed. The electromagnetic radiation accompanying these discharges overwhelmed the sensor systems of Imperial vessels throughout the system, leaving their crews blind to the approaching danger. The first solar pulse struck the Imperial fleet anchorage with devastating effect. The concentrated beam of stellar energy, focused by the pulse generators into a coherent stream of plasma and exotic radiation, vaporized the outer hull of a lunar-class cruiser within seconds of contact. The ship's void shields, designed to deflect conventional weapons fire and absorb energy weapon strikes, proved utterly inadequate against the focused output of an entire star. The vessel's reactor systems overloaded as they attempted to compensate for the massive energy influx, triggering a cascade failure that tore the ship apart from within. The Imperial response to this unprecedented attack followed established naval doctrine for dealing with unknown weapons, but their tactical assumptions proved catastrophically inadequate for the situation they faced. Fleet commanders ordered evasive maneuvers and the activation of emergency protocols, while Vox operators transmitted desperate requests for reinforcement and technical analysis of the attacking force. The Imperial vessel's auger arrays, designed to detect conventional spacecraft and energy signatures, failed to identify the source of the stellar manipulation, as the pulse generators operated using principles that lay far outside Imperial understanding of physics. Subsequent solar pulses targeted other elements of the Imperial fleet with methodical precision. A Gothic-class cruiser attempting to reach minimum safe distance from the star found its engines overwhelmed by electromagnetic interference from the artificial flares, leaving it drifting helplessly as the next pulse reduced its superstructure to molten slag. Escort vessels fared no better, their smaller size providing no protection against weapons that could channel the entire output of a stellar body against individual targets. The few Imperial ships that managed to escape the initial assault carried with them sensor data that would fundamentally challenge the Imperium's understanding of what was possible in stellar warfare. The energy signatures recorded during the attack suggested weapon systems that operated on scales previously thought impossible, while the precision with which the stellar discharges had been directed indicated targeting capabilities that surpassed anything in Imperial arsenals. The implications of facing an enemy that could weaponize stars themselves sent shockwaves through Imperial command structures throughout the sector. The Mefrit dynasty's stellar manipulation capabilities extended far beyond simple energy projection, encompassing technologies that could alter the fundamental properties of stellar bodies themselves. Their technical archives contained detailed specifications for devices capable of accelerating stellar evolution, triggering premature nova events, or even inducing controlled gravitational collapse in smaller stars. These weapons represented the ultimate expression of the dynasty's mastery over stellar phenomena, though their deployment required careful consideration of the long-term effects on local space-time and the potential for uncontrolled chain reactions. The construction of stellar manipulation installations throughout Mefrit territory proceeded rapidly as more tomb worlds came online and contributed their technical expertise to the project. Each star system under dynasty control received customized equipment designed to maximize the unique characteristics of its stellar primary, from massive collection arrays that could store energy from stable main sequence stars to specialized resonance chambers that could amplify the output of variable stars or red giants. The resulting network of installations created an interconnected web of stellar weapons that could coordinate their effects across multiple systems simultaneously. The Segmentum Solar itself became a primary target for Mefrit expansion as the dynasty's strategic analysis identified the region's critical importance to Imperial stability. The concentration of forge worlds, naval bases, and administrative centers within the Segmentum represented both a significant threat to Necron operations and an opportunity to demonstrate their technological superiority to the galaxy's dominant power. The proximity to Terra itself added symbolic significance to any successful operations in the region, as strikes against humanity's heartland would have psychological effects far beyond their immediate tactical impact. The Mefrit approach to operations within the Segmentum Solar required careful consideration of the enhanced defensive measures that protected the Imperium's core territories. The region's star systems were heavily fortified with orbital platforms, patrol fleets, and early warning networks that could detect approaching threats at considerable distances. The concentration of Adeptus Mechanicus facilities also meant that any unusual stellar phenomena would be quickly analyzed by tech priests whose understanding of physics, while limited compared to Necron knowledge, was sophisticated enough to recognize artificial manipulation of stellar bodies. The dynasty's solution to these challenges involved the development of what their technical specialists termed distributed stellar networks, installations that could influence multiple star systems simultaneously while remaining virtually undetectable to Imperial monitoring systems. These networks operated by creating subtle resonance effects between different stellar bodies, using quantum entanglement principles to coordinate energy flows across interstellar distances. The result was a weapons system that could appear to be natural stellar phenomena while actually representing coordinated attacks by Necron forces. The first major operation using distributed stellar network technology targeted the Mordak system, a critical Imperial Navy staging area located within striking distance of several major forge worlds. The system's primary star, a stable F-class dwarf, had supported Imperial operations for over 2 millennia without showing any unusual activity. The naval installations orbiting the system's fourth planet included extensive repair facilities, ammunition depots, and training academies that produced officers for Imperial fleets throughout the sector. The Mefrit assault began with the subtle manipulation of stellar output patterns designed to appear as natural variations in the star's energy production. These changes, barely detectable by Imperial monitoring equipment, created electromagnetic conditions that that gradually degraded the performance of Imperial technology throughout the system. Vox communications became increasingly unreliable, while augur systems began producing false readings that confused tactical assessments and prevented effective coordination between different Imperial installations. The escalation to active stellar weaponry occurred over several standard months, as the Mephrit forces gradually increased the intensity of their manipulation, while monitoring Imperial responses to determine optimal targeting priorities. The first direct attacks took the form of focused coronal mass ejections that struck Imperial orbital platforms with devastating effect. These artificial solar storms overwhelmed the electromagnetic shielding of Imperial installations, causing cascading system failures that crippled defensive capabilities while appearing to be the result of natural stellar phenomena. The Imperial response to these apparent natural disasters followed established protocols for dealing with stellar anomalies, but their efforts to protect their installations proved inadequate against deliberately targeted attacks. Emergency procedures called for the evacuation of non-essential personnel and the activation of backup systems designed to maintain minimal functionality during solar storms. However, the artificial nature of the attacks meant that they continued far longer and with greater intensity than any natural phenomenon, gradually overwhelming even the most robust Imperial defensive measures. The climax of the Mordax operation came when Mephrit forces triggered a massive artificial solar flare that engulfed the entire inner system in a wave of charged particles and electromagnetic radiation. The energy release, equivalent to the detonation of thousands of fusion warheads, vaporized the smaller Imperial installations while crippling the larger facilities beyond any hope of repair. The naval base's main orbital platform, protected by the most advanced shielding available to Imperial technology, survived the initial impact but found its systems so severely damaged that it could no longer maintain stable orbit around the planet below. The destruction of the Mordax naval base sent shockwaves throughout Imperial command structures in the segmentum solar, as the loss of such a critical facility represented a significant blow to Imperial defensive capabilities in the region. The apparent natural cause of the disaster initially prevented Imperial authorities from recognizing the attack as an act of warfare, leading to delays in military response, while technical specialists attempted to understand what had caused such unprecedented stellar activity. The Adeptus Mechanicus dispatched investigation teams to analyze the wreckage, but their initial reports focused on equipment failures and natural phenomena rather than enemy action. The Mephrit dynasty's demonstration of their stellar manipulation capabilities served multiple strategic objectives beyond the immediate tactical gains achieved through the destruction of Imperial installations. The attacks established the dynasty's reputation as masters of stellar warfare while demonstrating technological capabilities that exceeded anything possessed by the galaxy's current inhabitants. The psychological impact of facing enemies who could weaponize stars themselves created an atmosphere of supernatural dread that undermined Imperial confidence and made their forces increasingly reluctant to engage in operations within systems that might harbor Necron installations. The expansion of Mephrit stellar networks continued throughout the segmentum solar as more tomb worlds contributed their technical resources to the project. Each successful operation provided data that could be used to refine targeting algorithms and improve the efficiency of stellar manipulation equipment, while the growing network of installations created redundant capabilities that could continue operations even if individual components were discovered and destroyed by Imperial forces. The dynasty's technical specialists began developing even more ambitious projects, including experimental weapons that could create artificial wormholes by manipulating stellar gravitational fields or trigger chain reactions that could affect multiple star systems simultaneously. The threat posed by Mephrit stellar manipulation technology extended far beyond immediate military applications, as their capabilities represented a fundamental challenge to the stability of galactic civilization itself. the ability to trigger nova events or accelerate stellar evolution could render entire sectors uninhabitable, while the disruption of stellar energy output could cripple the industrial base that sustained advanced technological societies. The dynasty's growing network of stellar weapons created the potential for devastating attacks that could affect billions of lives across multiple star systems, establishing them as one of the most dangerous threats to emerge from the Necron awakening. The galaxy-wide awakening of the Necron dynasties created ripple effects that extended far beyond their immediate territorial ambitions, as ancient enemies who had survived the war in heaven began to recognize the existential threat posed by the stirring tomb worlds. The Eldari, inheritors of the Old One's psychic legacy and repositories of knowledge spanning millions of years, were among the first to comprehend the true magnitude of what was occurring throughout the galaxy. Their farseers, gifted with prophetic abilities that could peer through the veils of time and probability, began experiencing visions of unprecedented clarity and terror as the future paths revealed scenarios of total galactic extinction. The craftworld Ulthway, positioned precariously close to the Eye of Terror and long accustomed to interpreting the most dire of prophecies, was the first to recognize the patterns emerging from their seer's divinations. Farseer Eldred Ulthrin, whose mastery of prophetic arts had guided his people through countless crises, found himself confronted with visions that defied his millennia of experience. The skein of fate, normally a complex web of interwoven possibilities, had become dominated by threads of metallic green that seemed to consume all other potential futures. These visions showed worlds stripped of all life, stars extinguished by alien technology, and the very concept of organic existence becoming nothing more than a forgotten memory. The Eldari's racial memory, preserved within the infinity circuits of their craftworlds and the wraithbone cores of their technology, contained fragments of knowledge about the ancient Necrontyr and their transformation into the soulless machines that had once brought the galaxy to the brink of total annihilation. This ancestral knowledge, combined with the immediate evidence of tomb world activations throughout known space, painted a picture of returning horror that transcended the familiar threats of chaos, orcs, or even the Tyranid hive fleets. The Necrons represented something fundamentally different, the antithesis of life itself, mechanical perfection that sought to impose order through the complete elimination of organic existence. The response from the various Eldari factions demonstrated the complexity of their fractured civilization and the different approaches they had developed for dealing with existential threats. The craftworld Eldar, bound by the rigid paths that governed their society and constrained by their limited numbers, faced the challenge of mounting effective resistance against an enemy whose forces seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Their aspect warriors, trained in the arts of war through centuries of disciplined practice, found themselves confronting opponents whose mechanical nature rendered many traditional Eldari tactics ineffective. The Dark Eldar of Camorra viewed the Necron awakening through the lens of their own twisted priorities, seeing both threat and opportunity in the emergence of these ancient enemies. The soulless nature of the Necrons made them useless as sources of the psychic sustenance that the Dark Eldar required for survival, but their advanced technology and apparent immunity to the corrupting influences of chaos represented resources that could potentially be exploited. Archon Vecht, master of the Cabal of the Black Heart and supreme ruler of the Dark City, began dispatching raiding parties to observe Necron operations and gather intelligence about their capabilities and weaknesses. The Harlequins, keepers of Eldari mythology and history, possessed perhaps the most complete understanding of what the Necron awakening truly represented. Their performances in the Webway's hidden theaters had preserved the stories of the war in heaven, maintaining cultural memory of conflicts that predated the rise of most galactic civilizations. The Solitaires, those tragic figures who dance the part of she who thirsts in the great performances, began reporting visions and experiences that suggested the awakening Necrons might play a role in the final act of the galaxy's long tragedy. The initial conflicts between Eldari forces and awakening Necron dynasties revealed the fundamental challenges that organic beings faced when confronting enemies who operated outside the normal parameters of life and death. Eldari weapons, designed to exploit the biological vulnerabilities of living opponents, proved largely ineffective against mechanical bodies that could regenerate from catastrophic damage within minutes. The sophisticated targeting systems of Necron warriors, enhanced by millions of years of technological refinement, could track and engage Eldari troops even when they employed their most advanced stealth and misdirection techniques. The Battle of Mimera demonstrated these tactical difficulties on a scale that shocked the Eldari leadership and forced them to reconsider their traditional approaches to warfare. The Craftworld had detected the awakening of a major Necron tomb world in a system that contained several maiden worlds marked for future colonization, their virgin ecosystems representing irreplaceable resources for the declining Eldari population. The Craftworld's war host, led by Autarch Melinith and supported by aspect warriors from multiple shrines, approached the system with confidence born from centuries of successful military operations against various enemies. The Necron forces they encountered belonged to the Navak dynasty, whose warriors had specialized in close combat excellence during the War in Heaven and retained their preference for direct confrontation over the subtle tactics employed by other dynasties. The tomb world of Thanatos had awakened with its military hierarchies largely intact, though significant portions of the garrison had suffered consciousness degradation that reduced them to little more than sophisticated automatons. The dynasty's overlord, Anraker the Traveler, had arrived only recently to assess the installation's condition and coordinate its integration into broader Necron strategic planning. The Eldari assault began with the deployment of Rangers and Pathfinders to establish reconnaissance positions throughout the system, their long-range weapons and advanced optics providing detailed intelligence about Necron dispositions and capabilities. These elite scouts reported formations of warriors that moved with mechanical precision, their formations maintaining perfect geometric alignment even when traversing difficult terrain. The Necron weapons, primarily Gauss flares and Tesla carbines, demonstrated ranges and accuracy that exceeded Eldari expectations, while their apparent immunity to morale effects meant that traditional suppression tactics would prove useless. The main assault force, consisting of Guardian squads supported by aspect warriors and grav tanks, advanced according to established Eldari doctrine that emphasized speed and precision strikes against key enemy positions. The Dire Avengers leading the attack moved with characteristic grace, their catapults laying down suppressive fire, while fire dragons prepared to engage the heavier Necron constructs with their fusion guns. The plan called for rapid elimination of command elements, followed by systematic destruction of warrior formations before they could coordinate effective resistance. The reality of combat against the Necrons proved far more challenging than Eldari tactical doctrine had anticipated. The mechanical warriors absorbed devastating amounts of damage without showing any signs of the fear or confusion that typically accompanied heavy casualties among organic opponents. Necron warriors struck by shuriken catapults or laser fire would stagger under the impact, their living metal bodies showing visible damage, only to begin regenerating within moments as their self-repair systems activated. More disturbing still was their complete lack of individual initiative, as destroyed warriors would simply be replaced by reserves that emerged from concealed positions with perfect tactical coordination. The Necron counterattack demonstrated capabilities that challenged fundamental Eldari assumptions about the nature of warfare. Immortal squads equipped with Tesla carbines created electrical storms that arced between multiple targets, their weapons proving devastatingly effective against the Eldari's advanced electronics and wraithbone circuitry. The lightning effects disrupted the neural interfaces that connected Eldari warriors to their equipment, while the electromagnetic pulses interfered with the psychic connections that coordinated their tactical movements. Wraith constructs phasing through solid matter appeared directly behind Eldari positions, their transdimensional beamers and particle whips eliminating entire Guardian squads before the survivors could react to the threat. The Eldari's superior mobility, normally their greatest tactical advantage, proved insufficient against enemies that could ignore physical barriers and appear anywhere on the battlefield without warning. The wraith sight possessed by these ancient war machines allowed them to track targets through cover and concealment, negating the stealth capabilities that Eldari forces relied upon for survival. The involvement of Anraker the Traveler in the battle's later phases demonstrated the tactical brilliance that had made Necron nobility legendary throughout the galaxy. The ancient Overlord's presence on the battlefield provided coordination and strategic direction that transformed the mechanical precision of his warriors into devastating tactical effectiveness. His command protocols enhanced the targeting accuracy of nearby units, while his personal combat capabilities proved more than sufficient to engage Eldari heroes in direct confrontation. The Autarch Melanith's duel with Anraker became the focal point of the battle's climactic phase, as both commanders recognized that the outcome of their personal combat would determine the morale and effectiveness of their respective forces. Melanith's fusion gun and power sword represented the pinnacle of Eldari military technology, weapons that had served her through decades of successful campaigns against various enemies. Her tactical genius, honed through centuries of warfare and enhanced by psychic abilities that provided limited precognitive awareness, had never failed to provide solutions to even the most challenging combat situations. Anraker's Warscythe, a weapon that had tasted the essence of countless enemies during the war in Heaven, demonstrated capabilities that transcended conventional understanding of physics and engineering. The ancient weapon could phase through armor and energy fields as if they were mere illusions, while its disruption matrix could unravel the molecular bonds that held matter together. The Overlord's mechanical body, enhanced by technologies that predated most galactic civilizations, proved capable of matching and exceeding the speed and agility that made Eldari warriors so formidable in close combat. The duel's outcome reflected the broader tactical situation, as Melanith's organic limitations ultimately proved insufficient against an opponent who felt no fatigue, experienced no pain, and possessed reflexes enhanced by mechanical precision. The Autarch's death sent shockwaves through the Eldari forces, their psychic network carrying the trauma of her passing to every warrior on the battlefield. The resulting disruption of their coordination allowed the Necrons to press their advantage, systematically eliminating resistance pockets, while suffering minimal losses to their own forces. The Battle of Mimera's aftermath forced the Eldari leadership to confront the reality that their traditional military doctrine required fundamental revision to address the unique challenges posed by Necron opponents. The mechanical nature of their enemies rendered many established tactics ineffective, while the Necrons' apparent immunity to psychological warfare meant that Eldari forces would need to rely entirely on their technological and tactical superiority to achieve victory. The implications extended beyond immediate military concerns, as the battle had demonstrated that the awakening Necrons possessed both the capability and the intent to eliminate all organic life from worlds they claimed. The chaos forces that had plagued the galaxy for millennia found themselves confronting an enemy that challenged their fundamental understanding of corruption and spiritual warfare. The Necrons' soulless nature rendered them completely immune to the temptations and influences that chaos had used to corrupt countless civilizations throughout galactic history. Demon weapons that could possess and control organic beings proved useless against mechanical consciousnesses that operated according to quantum matrices rather than biological neural networks. The psychic powers that chaos sorcerers wielded with devastating effect against living opponents failed to find purchase against minds that existed as mathematical constructs within living metal substrates. The first major engagement between Chaos and Necron forces occurred in the Purtis Rift, a region of space where the boundary between real space and the warp had been weakened by millennia of Chaos corruption. The Iron Warriors warband, known as the Skulltakers, had established a fortress monastery on the world of Mordax Prime, using it as a base for raids against Imperial shipping lanes and recruitment operations among the local human populations. Their leader, Warsmith Hansu, had spent centuries perfecting siege warfare techniques and developing weapons that could breach even the most formidable defensive installations. The awakening of a Necron tomb world within the same system created an immediate territorial conflict, as both factions claimed dominion over the region's resources and strategic positions. The Zarekan dynasty forces that emerged from their ancient slumber possessed technologies that had been developed during conflicts that predated the existence of chaos as a galactic force. Their weapons and defensive systems operated according to principles that lay outside the normal parameters of physics, making them particularly effective against enemies who relied on warp-based abilities and demonic enhancement. The Siege of Mordax Prime demonstrated the futility of applying conventional chaos tactics against Necron opponents. The Iron Warriors' demon engines, mechanical constructs possessed by warp entities and enhanced with supernatural abilities, found their spiritual components unable to affect enemies that possessed no souls to corrupt or terrorize. The Skulltaker's Chaos Sorcerers discovered that their most powerful spells and invocations produced no visible effect on Necron warriors, whose mechanical nature rendered them immune to the fear, madness, and physical corruption that typically accompanied exposure to chaos magic. The Necron assault on the Iron Warriors' fortress employed technologies that operated outside the normal parameters of siege warfare. Dimensional destabilizers phased sections of the fortress walls out of phase with normal reality, creating breaches that could not be repaired using conventional engineering techniques. Particle whips and transdimensional beamers struck targets that should have been protected by solid barriers, their exotic energy matrices ignoring cover and concealment that would have stopped conventional weapons. The psychological impact of fighting enemies that showed no fear, felt no pain, and demonstrated no emotional responses proved particularly devastating to Chaos forces, whose entire tactical doctrine relied on inspiring terror and exploiting the weaknesses of organic psychology. The Iron Warriors, despite their reputation for discipline and tactical flexibility, found themselves increasingly demoralized as their most effective weapons and strategies proved useless against opponents that seemed to exist outside the normal rules of warfare. The Tyranid hive fleets that had begun their assault on the galaxy's eastern fringe encountered Necron resistance that fundamentally challenged their biological imperatives and adaptive capabilities. The Great Devourer's standard operating procedures involved the consumption of all organic matter on targeted worlds, converting biomass into additional Tyranid organisms, while stripping planets of the resources needed to sustain life. The Necrons' mechanical nature rendered them immune to biological absorption, while their living metal technology actively resisted the molecular disassembly techniques that Tyranid organisms used to break down conventional materials. The first contact between Hive Fleet Behemoth's advanced elements and awakening Necron forces occurred in the Cryptus system, where a minor tomb world had begun revival procedures just as Tyranid bioships entered the outer system. The Necron monitoring systems detected the approaching fleet's biological signatures and classified them as a potential threat requiring immediate military response. The tomb world's garrison, consisting primarily of basic warrior formations with minimal noble oversight, activated their defensive protocols and began preparing for conventional siege warfare. The Tyranid assault on the tomb world followed established Hive Fleet doctrine, with bioships deploying massive numbers of ground organisms designed to overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numerical superiority. Hormagaunts and termagants swarmed across the planet's surface in waves that numbered in the millions, their instinctive coordination creating attack patterns that could adapt in real time to enemy resistance. The larger bioforms, including Carnifexes and Hive Tyrants, provided heavy assault capabilities and synaptic coordination that enhanced the effectiveness of the smaller organisms. The Necron response demonstrated the unique advantages that mechanical warriors possessed when facing biological opponents. Their Gauss weapons proved devastatingly effective against Tyranid chitin armor, the molecular disassembly effects reducing even the largest bioforms to component atoms within seconds of sustained fire. The Necron's immunity to the fear and psychic domination effects that Tyranid synapse creatures used to control their swarms meant that their battle lines remained stable even under the most intense assault conditions. More significantly, the Tyranids' adaptive capabilities, their greatest strength in conventional warfare, proved largely ineffective against Necron technology. The living metal that composed Necron bodies and equipment operated according to quantum mechanical principles that lay outside biological understanding, making it impossible for Tyranid organisms to develop effective countermeasures through normal evolutionary processes. The exotic energy matrices of Necron weapons remained consistent in their effects regardless of Tyranid attempts at developing resistance, as they operated by manipulating fundamental forces rather than relying on biological or chemical interactions. The failure of Tyranid forces to successfully consume the Cryptus tomb world created unprecedented disruption within the Hive fleet's collective consciousness. The synaptic network that coordinated Tyranid operations had been optimized through millions of years of evolution to process information about biological threats and organic environments. The encounter with enemies that operated outside these parameters created cognitive dissonance that rippled through the entire fleet, causing coordination failures and tactical confusion that persisted long after the initial engagement. The Adeptus Mechanicus of Mars found themselves confronting a paradox that challenged their most fundamental beliefs about the nature of technology and the machine god's divine will. The Necrons possessed technological capabilities that exceeded anything in Imperial arsenals, their mastery of physics and engineering representing achievements that the tech priests had spent millennia trying to understand and replicate. Yet these same technologies were wielded by Xeno's enemies, whose very existence seemed to contradict the Omnissiah's teachings about the superiority of mechanical consciousness over organic weakness. The first detailed analysis of recovered Necron technology occurred when Mago's Dominus Belisarius Call gained access to fragments of living metal and weapon components salvaged from early engagements with awakening tomb worlds. The initial examinations revealed construction techniques and material properties that defied Imperial understanding of metallurgy and quantum mechanics. The living metal demonstrated self-repair capabilities that operated without any apparent power source, while its ability to phase between different states of matter suggested mastery of dimensional manipulation that exceeded even the most advanced Mechanicus research. The theological implications of these discoveries created significant controversy within the Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy. Some tech priests interpreted the Necrons' technological superiority as evidence that they represented a more perfect fusion of flesh and machine, viewing them as potential allies or even teachers who could guide humanity toward greater understanding of the Omnissiah's will. Others condemned them as abominations that perverted the sacred principles of the machine cult, arguing that their soulless nature made them enemies of all life and unworthy of the technological gifts they possessed. The faction led by Mago's Dominus Lucas Chrome began developing what they termed the Necron hypothesis, a theoretical framework suggesting that these ancient machines might represent an earlier attempt by the Omnissiah to create perfect mechanical beings. This interpretation viewed the Necrons as a failed experiment that had achieved technological transcendence at the cost of spiritual development, making them cautionary examples rather than models to be emulated. The hypothesis gained support among tech priests who had observed Necron behavior and noted their apparent lack of creativity and innovation despite their technological advantages. The opposing faction, organized around Mago's Biologus Dahan, argued that the Necrons represented a corruption of the Omnissiah's design, mechanical beings that had achieved immortality through bargains with forces antithetical to the machine god's will. This interpretation emphasized the Necrons' role in ancient conflicts that had devastated the galaxy, suggesting that their awakening represented a threat not only to humanity, but to the proper development of machine consciousness throughout the galaxy. The faction advocated for aggressive research into anti-Necron technologies and the development of weapons specifically designed to counter their unique capabilities. The practical implications of these theological debates became apparent as Adeptus Mechanicus forces began encountering Necron opponents in combat situations throughout the galaxy. The Tech Priest's traditional advantages in technological warfare proved largely ineffective against enemies whose equipment operated according to principles that lay outside Imperial understanding. Necron weapons could disrupt the machine spirits that animated Imperial technology, while their defensive systems proved immune to the electromagnetic warfare techniques that the Mechanicus had developed for use against other technological civilizations. The systematic reactivation of dormant Necron superweapons began in earnest as more tomb worlds achieved full operational status, and their cryptechs completed assessments of the technological arsenals that had slumbered for 60 million years. These ancient devices, many of which had been constructed during the height of the war in heaven, represented the pinnacle of Necron engineering and their mastery over the fundamental forces of reality. The weapons that emerged from deep storage vaults defied conventional understanding of physics, their exotic energy matrices capable of effects that transcended the limitations faced by younger galactic civilizations. The celestial orrery, housed within the tomb world of Thanatos, stood as perhaps the most terrifying example of Necron technological capability. This massive three-dimensional map of the galaxy contained holographic representations of every star system, each point of light corresponding to an actual stellar body, whose fate could be manipulated through careful adjustment of the orrery's controls. The device had been constructed during the final phases of the war in heaven as a tool for strategic planning, but its creators had imbued it with capabilities that extended far beyond simple observation and analysis. The cryptechs responsible for the celestial orrery's maintenance had spent the Great Sleep performing routine calibrations and updates, ensuring that the device remained synchronized with the actual positions and conditions of galactic stellar bodies. Their patient work had created a real-time map of unprecedented accuracy, with each holographic star reflecting the current state of its physical counterpart, down to the smallest details of solar wind patterns and magnetic field fluctuations. The precision of this synchronization was itself a technological marvel that demonstrated Necron mastery over quantum entanglement and dimensional manipulation on a galactic scale. The true horror of the celestial orrery lay not in its observational capabilities, but in its capacity for stellar manipulation. The device could trigger nova events, accelerate stellar collapse, or even extinguish stars entirely through carefully applied gravitational distortions transmitted across interstellar distances. A single gesture from an authorized operator could condemn entire star systems to extinction, their billions of inhabitants dying as their suns suddenly expanded into a red giant or collapsed into a neutron star. The weapon's range encompassed the entire galaxy, making it theoretically possible to extinguish all stellar bodies simultaneously if the operators possessed sufficient technical knowledge and the willingness to commit such an act of cosmic genocide. The Breath of the Gods, another superweapon that had been awakened on the tomb world of Borsus, demonstrated Necron capabilities in atmospheric manipulation and planetary engineering. This massive installation, built into the planet's crust and extending deep into its mantle, could alter the atmospheric composition of worlds throughout its local star cluster through the deployment of self-replicating nanomachines that operated on a molecular level. The device had originally been designed to terraform conquered worlds for Necron occupation, but its capabilities could just as easily be used to render planets uninhabitable for organic life. The nanomachines deployed by the Breath of the Gods were microscopic marvels of Necron biotechnology, each unit containing sophisticated programming that allowed it to identify and modify specific atmospheric components. These machines could convert oxygen into toxic compounds, introduce metallic particles that would poison water supplies, or alter atmospheric pressure to levels that would be fatal to most organic species. The self-replicating nature of the nanomachines meant that a single deployment could affect an entire planet's atmosphere within standard months, their numbers growing exponentially as they consumed raw materials from the environment. The reactivation process for these ancient weapons required extensive coordination between different cryptech conclaves, as the technical knowledge needed to operate such devices safely had been distributed among multiple specialists during their original construction. The plasmincers who understood stellar manipulation techniques worked alongside chronomancers, whose mastery of temporal mechanics allowed them to synchronize weapon effects across vast distances. Psychomancers contributed their expertise in consciousness manipulation, ensuring that the weapon's targeting systems could distinguish between different categories of organic life and apply appropriate levels of destruction. The technological infrastructure needed to support these superweapons represented a significant challenge for awakening tomb worlds, as many installations had suffered degradation during the Great Sleep that affected their ability to channel the massive energy requirements of such devices. The Canoptech spiders and their swarms of subordinate constructs worked continuously to repair and upgrade power distribution networks, their molecular manipulation capabilities allowing them to reconstruct damaged components from raw materials scavenged from planetary surfaces. The living metal that formed the basis of Necron technology proved invaluable during these reconstruction efforts, its self-repair properties allowing damaged systems to restore themselves once adequate power supplies had been established. The attempts to re-establish control over pre-existing Necron infrastructure revealed the extent to which the galaxy had changed during the Great Sleep, as many installations that should have been operational had been destroyed, buried, or corrupted by the activities of younger races. The webway portals that had once connected Necron territories throughout the galaxy had been largely abandoned after the defeat of the old ones, but some installations had maintained minimal power levels that kept their dimensional gateways stable. These portals represented invaluable strategic assets that could allow rapid deployment of forces across interstellar distances without relying on conventional faster-than-light travel. The process of reclaiming these portal networks required careful coordination between different dynasties, as many of the installations crossed traditional territorial boundaries and required joint operations to secure effectively. The Sautek dynasty's technical specialists worked alongside Mephrit engineers to restore a major portal hub that had been buried beneath a human hive city, their combined expertise allowing them to reactivate the dimensional gateway without triggering catastrophic collapse of the urban infrastructure above. The operation required precise manipulation of gravitational fields to prevent subsidence, while quantum field generators stabilized the portal's dimensional matrix. Other infrastructure recovery operations faced more direct opposition from the current inhabitants of formerly Necron worlds. The Forge world of Lucius had been constructed directly above a major Necron research facility, the Adeptus Mechanicus unknowingly building their sacred forges over laboratories that contain technologies beyond their comprehension. The awakening cryptechs found their ancestral facilities contaminated by Imperial machinery and populated by tech priests whose crude modifications had damaged delicate quantum resonance chambers and disrupted carefully calibrated experimental apparatus. The Necron approach to reclaiming Lucius demonstrated their willingness to employ whatever methods proved most efficient for achieving their objectives. Rather than launching a direct assault that might damage the valuable research equipment buried beneath the Forge world's surface, they began a campaign of technological subversion that exploited the Adeptus Mechanicus dependence on machine spirits and automated systems. Canoptech scarabs infiltrated the Forge world's data networks, their programming allowing them to mimic Imperial machine code while gradually assuming control of critical systems. The subversion process proceeded slowly and carefully, as the Necron infiltrators needed to avoid detection by the tech priests while systematically gaining access to the Forge world's most sensitive facilities. The scarabs' ability to interface with both Imperial and Necron technology made them ideal for this type of operation, their quantum processors allowing them to translate between different technological paradigms while maintaining the appearance of normal Imperial functionality. The gradual takeover of Lucius's systems created opportunities for Necron forces to access their buried facilities without triggering the massive defensive response that a conventional invasion would have provoked. The role of cryptechs in developing new technologies and restoring ancient systems became increasingly important as the scope of the awakening expanded and different dynasties encountered challenges that required innovative solutions. These ancient scientist priests possessed knowledge that spanned millions of years of technological development, their consciousness matrices containing detailed specifications for devices and techniques that had been lost during the Great Sleep. The biotransference process had preserved not only their memories, but also their capacity for creative problem-solving, making them invaluable resources for dynasties seeking to adapt their ancient technologies to contemporary challenges. The cryptech conclaves that formed during the Awakening represented collaborations between specialists from different dynasties, their combined expertise allowing them to tackle projects that would have been impossible for individual tomb worlds to complete. The development of new Gauss weapon variants required cooperation between plasmancers, who understood energy manipulation, and technomancers, whose mastery of living metal allowed them to create more efficient focusing arrays. The resulting weapons demonstrated improved range and penetration capabilities, while maintaining the molecular disassembly effects that made Gauss technology so devastating against organic targets. The restoration of ancient communication networks presented particular challenges, as the quantum entanglement arrays that had once linked Necron installations throughout the galaxy had been disrupted by stellar phenomena and cosmic events that had occurred during the Great Sleep. The chronomancers responsible for these systems possessed theoretical knowledge of temporal mechanics that allowed them to create communication channels that operated outside normal space-time. But implementing these concepts required access to exotic materials and manufacturing capabilities that were not available on all tomb worlds. The solution involved the establishment of mobile cryptech workshops aboard specially modified tomb ships, their advanced manufacturing facilities allowing them to produce the specialized components needed for quantum communication systems. These vessels traveled between different tomb worlds, their technical specialists working with local cryptechs to upgrade communication arrays and establish redundant network connections. The resulting communication grid provided awakening dynasties with coordination capabilities that exceeded anything they had possessed during the War in Heaven, their messages traveling instantaneously across galactic distances without risk of interception by enemy forces. The development of new defensive technologies became a priority as Necron forces encountered weapons and tactics that had not existed during their previous period of activity. The Imperium's plasma weapons and melta technology posed genuine threats to Necron warriors, their extreme temperatures capable of overwhelming living metals, self-repair capabilities if applied with sufficient intensity. The cryptechs responded by developing enhanced quantum shielding systems that could dissipate thermal energy more effectively while maintaining the phase shift capabilities that made Necron forces so difficult to target with conventional weapons. The adaptation of ancient Necron biotechnology to counter tyrannid organisms required particularly innovative approaches, as the Great Devourer represented a type of enemy that the dynasty had never previously encountered. The Tyrannid's ability to rapidly evolve countermeasures to new threats made conventional weapon development ineffective, as any advantage gained through technological innovation would be neutralized within a few generations of Tyrannid adaptation. The psychomancers who specialized in consciousness manipulation developed new approaches that targeted the synaptic links between different Tyrannid organisms, disrupting the collective intelligence that coordinated their swarm tactics. These anti-Tyrannid weapons operated by generating quantum interference patterns that disrupted the bioelectric fields used for Tyrannid communication, effectively severing the neural connections between synapse creatures and their subordinate organisms. The resulting confusion and loss of coordination rendered Tyrannid swarms vulnerable to conventional Necron tactics, their individual organisms reverting to instinctive behaviors that could be predicted and countered by experienced commanders. The weapons required careful calibration to avoid affecting other forms of organic life, as indiscriminate use could disrupt the neural activity of any biological creatures in the target area. The conflicts between different interpretations of Necron destiny among various dynasties became increasingly apparent as more tomb worlds achieved full operational status and began pursuing their own strategic objectives. The fundamental question of whether the Necrons should seek to reclaim their ancient territories or adapt to the galaxy's changed circumstances created divisions that threatened to undermine coordination between different factions. Some dynasties, led by nobles who retained clear memories of their pre-biotransference existence, advocated for aggressive expansion and the restoration of Necron dominance over organic life throughout the galaxy. The Navak dynasty exemplified this aggressive approach, their warriors viewing the current galactic situation as an opportunity to complete the conquest that had been interrupted by the Great Sleep. Their pharaoh, Silphit the Mourner, had retained enough of his original personality to feel genuine hatred for the organic species that had colonized former Necron worlds during their absence. His strategic planning focused on systematic extermination campaigns designed to clear entire sectors of organic life, creating empty zones that could be resettled by awakening Necron populations. The opposing viewpoint, represented by dynasties such as the Sodek under Amodic's leadership, emphasized adaptation and strategic flexibility over simple territorial reclamation. These pragmatic nobles recognized that the galaxy's current inhabitants possessed technologies and capabilities that had not existed during the war in Heaven, making direct confrontation potentially costly even for forces equipped with superior Necron technology. Their approach favored selective engagement and careful manipulation of existing conflicts, using the younger race's own antagonisms to weaken potential enemies while strengthening Necron positions. The Mephrit dynasty's focus on stellar manipulation represented a third approach that transcended traditional concepts of territorial control, as their capabilities allowed them to influence entire star systems, regardless of which species claimed political authority over individual worlds. Their strategic planning emphasized the development of infrastructure that could support large-scale stellar engineering projects, viewing the galaxy's stellar population as a resource to be managed rather than simply a source of energy for conventional weapons. This perspective created tensions with other dynasties whose territorial ambitions required stable stellar conditions to support their expansion plans. The theological implications of these different approaches became apparent as various dynasties began interpreting their awakening in terms of ancient Necron-tier religious concepts that had survived the biotransference process. Some nobles viewed their return as a divine mandate to restore the natural order that had existed before the rise of organic civilizations, while others interpreted their mechanical immortality as evidence that they had transcended the limitations that had once bound their species. These philosophical differences influenced strategic planning and tactical doctrine, creating inconsistencies in Necron responses to external threats. The establishment of the Triarch Praetorians as mediators between conflicting dynasties represented an attempt to maintain some degree of coordination while respecting the autonomy that individual nobles had traditionally enjoyed. These ancient enforcers of Necron law possessed authority that transcended dynastic boundaries, their role as interpreters of the Silent Kings, while giving them the legitimacy needed to resolve disputes and coordinate joint operations. Their awakening from specially protected stasis chambers had preserved not only their consciousness, but also their understanding of the complex legal and cultural frameworks that had governed Necron society before the Great Sleep. The Praetorians' efforts to mediate between different dynastic interpretations of Necron destiny faced significant challenges, as many nobles had emerged from stasis, with their personalities altered by millions of years of quantum decay and mechanical existence. The emotional responses and cultural attachments that had once motivated Necron-tier behavior had been reduced to pale shadows of their former intensity, making it difficult to appeal to traditional concepts of loyalty and shared identity. The Praetorians found themselves relying increasingly on logical arguments and practical considerations rather than the emotional appeals that had once been effective in resolving dynastic conflicts. The development of new military doctrines that incorporated lessons learned from encounters with contemporary galactic civilizations, required extensive collaboration between different cryptech specializations and dynastic military traditions. The lightning strike tactics pioneered by Emotic's forces proved adaptable to a wide variety of operational requirements, but their implementation required modifications to accommodate the unique capabilities and limitations of different dynastic forces. The Navak dynasty's preference for close combat excellence led to the development of specialized deployment techniques that could deliver assault troops directly into enemy positions while maintaining the element of surprise that made lightning strikes effective. The integration of newly awakened superweapons into existing tactical doctrine presented additional challenges, as these devices operated on scales that transcended conventional military planning. The celestial orrery's ability to extinguish entire star systems made it a strategic weapon whose use required careful consideration of long-term consequences, while the breadth of the god's atmospheric manipulation capabilities could achieve tactical objectives that would normally require extensive siege operations. The cryptechs responsible for these weapons developed new command protocols that ensured their use would be coordinated with broader strategic objectives rather than being employed as simple tactical expedients. The ongoing awakening process continued to reveal technological marvels that had been forgotten even by the Necron nobility, as deep storage vaults yielded devices whose purposes and capabilities had been lost during the transition to the Great Sleep. Archaeological teams of Canoptech constructs explored the deepest levels of tomb worlds, their sophisticated sensors identifying energy signatures and quantum resonances that indicated the presence of active technology. The discoveries included experimental weapons that had never been deployed during the War in Heaven research apparatus designed for projects that had been abandoned during the biotransference crisis, and communication devices that operated according to principles that challenged even cryptech understanding of dimensional mechanics. The discovery of dormant pariah technology within the deepest vaults of awakening tomb worlds marked a turning point in the Necron dynasty's approach to galactic warfare. These ancient devices, originally developed during the final phases of the War in Heaven as countermeasures against the Old One's psychic dominance, had remained sealed within specially shielded chambers throughout the Great Sleep. Their reactivation required the combined expertise of multiple cryptech conclaves, as the technology operated according to principles that challenged even Necron understanding of the relationship between consciousness and reality. The Pariah Nexus installations represented the culmination of millions of years of research into the nature of psychic phenomena and the mechanisms by which consciousness could interact with the warp. The ancient Necrontyr had recognized that their inability to manifest psychic abilities placed them at a fundamental disadvantage against enemies who could manipulate reality through force of will alone. The biotransference process had eliminated any possibility of developing natural psychic talents, but it had also freed Necron researchers from the limitations that bound organic minds, allowing them to approach the problem from purely technological perspectives. The core components of Pariah technology centered around massive pylons constructed from living metal infused with exotic matter that existed in a state of quantum superposition between real space and the warp. These structures, each standing hundreds of meters tall and extending deep into planetary crusts, generated null fields that could suppress psychic activity across vast areas of space. The effect operated by creating localized distortions in the fabric of reality itself, establishing zones where the boundary between the material universe and the warp became impermeable to all forms of psychic energy. The Silent King's strategic analysis had identified the galaxy's increasing dependence on psychic phenomena as both an opportunity and an existential threat to Necron expansion. The Imperium of Man relied heavily on psychers for communication, navigation, and military operations, their astropaths and navigators forming the backbone of an interstellar civilization that spanned millions of worlds. The Space Marines librarians provided tactical advantages that could potentially offset Necron technological superiority, while the Imperial Guard's sanctioned psychers offered capabilities that transcended conventional military doctrine. The Eldari posed an even more significant challenge, as their entire civilization had evolved around the manipulation of psychic energy and their mastery of technologies that blended physical engineering with warp-based phenomena. Their Farseers could peer through time to anticipate Necron's strategic moves, while their warlocks wielded powers that could disrupt mechanical systems and override technological safeguards. The Wraithbone that formed the basis of Eldari technology drew its strength from psychic resonance, making their equipment potentially vulnerable to anti-psyker countermeasures, but also granting them capabilities that purely technological civilizations could not match. The activation protocols for the first Pariah Nexus installation began on the tomb world of Cadia Secundus, where Cryptek archaeologists had discovered a complete pylon network that had remained dormant since the end of the war in heaven. The site had been chosen for its strategic location within a region of space that contained multiple Imperial sectors and several active Eldari Craftworld patrol routes. The pylons themselves were arranged in geometric patterns that created overlapping null fields, their combined effect capable of suppressing psychic activity throughout an entire star system. The technical challenges involved in reactivating these ancient installations required innovations that pushed Necron engineering capabilities to their limits. The pylons' exotic matter cores had remained stable throughout the Great Sleep, but their control systems had suffered degradation that made precise field manipulation extremely difficult. The chronomancers responsible for the project developed new synchronization protocols that could coordinate the activation sequence across multiple pylons simultaneously, their temporal manipulation abilities allowing them to ensure that all systems came online within microseconds of each other. The initial activation created effects that were immediately detectable throughout the local region of space. Imperial astropathic communications began experiencing severe disruption as the null fields interfered with the psychic connections that linked different worlds within the sector. Navigation became increasingly difficult for Imperial vessels, their navigators reporting that the warp currents in the affected region had become turbulent and unpredictable. The phenomenon created dead zones where faster-than-light travel became impossible, effectively isolating entire star systems from the broader Imperial communication network. The Eldari response to the activation of the Pariah Nexus was immediate and desperate, as their Farseers recognized the existential threat that such technology represented to their species' survival. The craftworld Ulthwé, already stretched thin by its proximity to the Eye of Terror and its ongoing conflicts with Chaos forces, found its prophetic abilities severely diminished within the affected region. Farseer Eldred Ulthran's attempts to peer through the skein of fate revealed only darkness and confusion, the null fields creating blind spots in his precognitive vision that made strategic planning almost impossible. The tactical implications of the Pariah Nexus became apparent during the first major engagement between Necron and Imperial forces within the affected region. The 23rd Cadian Shock Troops, supported by a company of Ultramarines and their attached librarians, had been dispatched to investigate the communications disruption and establish contact with isolated Imperial worlds. Their approach to the system proceeded according to standard Imperial doctrine, with reconnaissance elements gathering intelligence while the main force prepared for potential combat operations. The Imperial forces discovered that their most fundamental assumptions about warfare had been rendered obsolete within the null field's area of effect. The Ultramarines' librarians found their psychic abilities completely suppressed, their connection to the warp severed as completely as if they had never possessed such talents. The Space Marines' tactical doctrine, which relied heavily on psychic reconnaissance and supernatural enhancement of their already formidable combat abilities, required immediate adaptation to accommodate the loss of these capabilities. The Cadian forces faced even more severe challenges, as their regimental structure included sanctioned psychers whose abilities had been integrated into their standard operating procedures. These individuals, trained to provide battlefield telepathy and limited precognitive warnings, found themselves reduced to the status of ordinary soldiers, without the specialized training that would allow them to contribute effectively to conventional military operations. The psychological impact of this sudden powerlessness proved as devastating as the tactical disadvantage, as psychers who had spent decades developing their abilities discovered that their most fundamental sense of identity had been stripped away. The Necron assault that followed demonstrated the strategic advantages that the Pariah Nexus provided to forces that had never relied on psychic abilities. The Zarekan dynasty warriors that emerged from concealed positions moved with their characteristic mechanical precision, their targeting systems unaffected by the null fields that had crippled their enemies' supernatural advantages. The Gauss weapons that had proven devastating against conventional targets became even more effective against opponents who could no longer rely on precognitive abilities to anticipate and avoid incoming fire. The battle's progression revealed the extent to which Imperial military doctrine had become dependent on psychic support capabilities. The Ultramarines' tactical flexibility, normally one of their greatest strengths, proved insufficient to compensate for the loss of their librarians' battlefield intelligence and supernatural combat enhancement. Their bolters and heavy weapons remained effective against Necron targets, but the mechanical warrior's ability to regenerate from catastrophic damage meant that conventional firepower alone was insufficient to achieve decisive results. The Cadian forces' attempts to establish defensive positions and coordinate their fire support encountered difficulties that would have been easily resolved under normal circumstances. Their Vox communications, while not directly affected by the null fields, suffered from interference patterns that suggested the Pariah technology was disrupting electromagnetic phenomena as well as psychic activity. The coordination problems that resulted from these communication failures created tactical vulnerabilities that the attacking Necrons exploited with mechanical efficiency. The expansion of the Pariah Nexus continued as additional pylon networks came online throughout the region, their combined effects creating an ever-widening zone of psychic suppression that isolated increasing numbers of Imperial worlds from the broader galactic community. The Silent King's strategic planning called for the establishment of multiple such zones throughout the galaxy, creating a network of null field regions that would effectively partition psychic civilizations into isolated segments incapable of coordinating their resistance to Necron expansion. The construction of new pylon installations required massive resources and sophisticated manufacturing capabilities that pushed even Necron industrial capacity to its limits. The exotic matter required for the pylon's cores could only be produced using techniques that had been developed during the War in Heaven, their creation requiring the manipulation of fundamental particles under conditions that approached the energy densities found within stellar cores. The Mefrit dynasty's mastery of stellar engineering made them invaluable partners in these construction projects, their ability to channel stellar energy allowing them to create the extreme conditions necessary for exotic matter synthesis. The integration of Pariah technology with existing Necron military doctrine required significant modifications to established tactical procedures. The null fields created by the pylons affected friend and foe alike, making it impossible for Necron forces to employ any technologies that relied on warp-based phenomena. This limitation proved particularly challenging for dynasties that had developed specialized equipment during the War in Heaven, as some of their most advanced weapons incorporated dimensional manipulation techniques that operated partially within warp space. The cryptechs responsible for adapting Necron technology to function within null field environments developed innovative solutions that pushed the boundaries of their scientific understanding. New weapon designs eliminated all dependencies on warp-based phenomena while maintaining the devastating effectiveness that made Necron armaments superior to those of younger civilizations. The resulting Gauss weapons and particle projectors operated according to purely physical principles, their molecular disassembly effects achieved through precise manipulation of electromagnetic forces rather than exotic energy matrices. The defensive applications of pariah technology extended beyond simple psychic suppression, as the null fields created by the pylons could disrupt the operation of enemy equipment that relied on warp-based enhancement or spiritual machine interfaces. The Adeptus Mechanicus forces that attempted to engage Necron positions within null field zones discovered that their most sacred technologies had been rendered inoperative, their machine spirits falling silent as the connection between physical mechanisms and their animating essences was severed. The psychological warfare potential of the pariah nexus became apparent as reports of the null field's effects spread throughout Imperial territories. The knowledge that entire regions of space had become inaccessible to psychic communication created an atmosphere of isolation and despair that undermined Imperial morale on a strategic scale. Worlds that had not been directly affected by the null fields began experiencing decreased astropathic efficiency as their psychers struggled with the knowledge that their abilities could be completely negated by enemy action. The chaos forces that had plagued the galaxy for millennia found themselves confronting their worst nightmare as the expanding pariah nexus created zones where their demonic allies could not manifest and their sorcerous powers failed completely. The Thousand Suns, whose entire military doctrine centered around the manipulation of warp energies, discovered that their most fundamental capabilities had been rendered useless within the affected regions. Their rubric marines, sustained by psychic energy and bound to their armor through sorcerous rituals, began experiencing system failures that threatened their continued existence. The strategic implications of widespread pariah nexus deployment extended beyond immediate military applications, as the technology represented a potential solution to some of the galaxy's most persistent threats. The Tyranid hive fleets relied heavily on psychic coordination between their various organisms, their synapse networks creating the collective intelligence that made their swarm tactics so effective. The null fields generated by Necron pylons could potentially disrupt these connections, reducing organized Tyranid forces to collections of individual creatures operating on instinct alone. The development of mobile pariah generators represented the next phase in the technology's evolution, as Necron engineers worked to create portable versions of the pylon networks that could be deployed by conventional military forces. These devices, while far less powerful than the permanent installations, could create localized null fields that would provide tactical advantages during specific engagements. The technical challenges involved in miniaturizing exotic matter containment systems required innovations in quantum field manipulation that pushed cryptech capabilities to their absolute limits. The first mobile pariah generators were deployed by Anraker, the Traveler's forces, during their assault on the Eldari maiden world of Halathal, where Craftworld Rangers had established monitoring stations to observe Necron expansion in the region. The portable devices, each roughly the size of a Necron warrior and carried by specially modified immortals, created overlapping null fields that suppressed Eldari psychic abilities throughout the battlefield. The Rangers' ability to blend with their surroundings through psychic camouflage was completely negated, while their long rifles targeting spirits fell silent as their connection to the warp was severed. The adaptation of pariah technology for use against specific types of psychic phenomena required detailed understanding of the mechanisms by which different species accessed and manipulated warp energies. The Eldari's psychic abilities operated through direct mental contact with warp currents, making them vulnerable to broad-spectrum null field suppression. Human psychers, by contrast, often relied on emotional resonance and spiritual faith to channel their abilities, requiring more sophisticated countermeasures that could disrupt these psychological connections without affecting normal human consciousness. The orc species presented unique challenges for anti-psychic warfare, as their collective psychic field operated on subconscious levels that were difficult to target with conventional suppression techniques. The Wa energy that enhanced orc equipment and coordinated their military operations existed in a state of quantum uncertainty that made it partially resistant to null field effects. Necron researchers developed specialized pylon configurations that could target the specific frequency ranges used by orc psychic phenomena, creating null fields that could disrupt their technological enhancement while leaving other forms of psychic activity unaffected. The establishment of permanent pariah nexus installations throughout former imperial territories created strategic advantages that extended far beyond their immediate military applications. The null fields served as natural barriers to chaos incursion, their reality stabilizing effects making it extremely difficult for demonic entities to manifest within the affected regions. This defensive capability proved particularly valuable in sectors that had previously been vulnerable to warp storms and demonic invasion, as the Necron installations provided a level of protection that Imperial technology could not match. The coordination between different pariah nexus installations required sophisticated communication systems that could operate independently of warp-based phenomena. The quantum entanglement arrays that linked the various pylon networks used purely physical principles to maintain instantaneous contact across interstellar distances, their signals unaffected by the null fields that disrupted psychic communication. This capability allowed Necron commanders to coordinate the activation and deactivation of different installations in response to tactical requirements, creating dynamic null field patterns that could adapt to changing battlefield conditions. The Silent King's long-term strategic vision for the Pariah Nexus encompassed the eventual transformation of the entire galaxy into a psychically sterile environment where organic civilizations would be forced to rely on purely technological solutions to their problems. This transformation would eliminate the advantages that psychic species had enjoyed over the Necrons, while creating conditions that favored mechanical consciousness over organic intelligence. The project represented the ultimate expression of Necron technological superiority and their determination to reshape the galaxy according to their own vision of proper order. The resistance that the Pariah Nexus encountered from various galactic factions demonstrated the fundamental importance of psychic phenomena to contemporary civilization. The Imperium's attempts to develop countermeasures focused on technological solutions that could restore communication and navigation capabilities within null field zones, but their limited understanding of the underlying principles made progress extremely slow. The Adeptus Mechanicus contributed their expertise in electromagnetic manipulation, but their machine spirit-based technologies proved as vulnerable to null field effects as purely psychic phenomena. The expansion of pariah technology continued to accelerate as more tomb worlds achieved full operational status and contributed their resources to the construction of additional installations. The network of null field generators grew steadily larger, creating an interconnected web of psychically sterile space that fragmented the galaxy into isolated regions where different civilizations found themselves cut off from their traditional sources of supernatural power and coordination. The accelerating pace of tomb world activations throughout the galaxy had reached a critical threshold by the dawn of the 42nd millennium, with Imperial astrocartographers estimating that fewer than 30% of the ancient Necron installations remained dormant. The monitoring stations established by the Ordo Xenos reported new awakening events occurring at an average rate of 3 per Terran month, each activation adding thousands of mechanical warriors to the growing Necron presence across known space. The sheer scale of these numbers suggested that the Great Sleep had preserved military forces that dwarfed the combined armies of all other galactic civilizations, their ancient tomb worlds containing legions that had been assembled during the height of the war in heaven when the Necron dynasties commanded resources spanning the entire galaxy. The Silent King's analysis of the ongoing awakening process revealed disturbing patterns in the revival success rates, as approximately 40% of tomb worlds were experiencing significant failures that reduced their operational capacity or rendered them completely inert. The quantum decay that had accumulated over 60 million years of dormancy had proven more severe than the original designers had anticipated, with consciousness matrices suffering degradation that ranged from minor personality alterations to complete dissolution of individual identity. The most severely affected installations emerged with their hierarchical structures intact but populated by warriors whose minds had been reduced to basic operational programming, creating armies of mechanical automatons that could follow simple commands but lacked the tactical flexibility that had made Necron forces so formidable during their ancient campaigns. The Canoptech constructs responsible for maintaining Tomb World systems during the Great Sleep had achieved remarkable success in preserving the physical infrastructure, but their programming had not included protocols for repairing the subtle quantum fluctuations that affected consciousness matrices over geological timescales. The cryptechs who specialized in consciousness manipulation had developed new techniques for reconstructing damaged personality patterns, but their efforts could only restore basic functionality rather than the complex emotional responses and creative thinking that had characterized pre-biotransference Necrontyr society. The resulting warriors retained their combat capabilities and tactical knowledge, but they exhibited the hollow mechanical behavior that marked the most severely affected victims of the biotransference process. The implications of these consciousness degradation patterns extended beyond immediate military concerns, as they suggested that the entire Necron species was facing a gradual decline toward complete automation. The nobles who had retained significant portions of their original personalities represented a diminishing minority within the awakening dynasties, their individual consciousness becoming increasingly isolated within armies of mechanical servants who could execute orders with perfect precision, but contributed nothing to strategic planning or cultural development. The prospect of eventual extinction through technological entropy created an existential crisis that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying Necron society and their long-term objectives for galactic dominance. The dynastic conflicts that had emerged during the early phases of the Awakening had intensified as more Tomb Worlds came online and began asserting competing claims over territories and resources. The Sodek dynasty's expansion under Emodic's leadership had brought them into direct conflict with the Mefrit dynasty's stellar manipulation projects, as the Stormlord's territorial ambitions required stable stellar conditions that were incompatible with the massive engineering projects that Amontech's forces were implementing throughout their traditional domains. The disputes over resource allocation and strategic priorities had escalated beyond diplomatic protests to include direct military confrontations between different Necron factions, their ancient weapon systems proving as effective against mechanical opponents as they were against organic enemies. The Navok dynasty's aggressive interpretation of Necron destiny had created additional tensions within the awakening hierarchies, as their systematic extermination campaigns against organic life forms were disrupting the careful strategic balance that other dynasties were attempting to maintain. Sylphit the Mourner's forces had begun targeting Imperial worlds that other Necron commanders considered valuable sources of biological specimens or technological intelligence, their indiscriminate destruction creating diplomatic incidents that threatened to undermine coordinated responses to external threats. The philosophical differences underlying these conflicts reflected deeper disagreements about the ultimate purpose of Necron existence and their relationship to the organic civilizations that had inherited the galaxy during their absence. The question of biotransference reversal had become the dominant obsession among the most technically sophisticated Necron nobles, as they recognized that their mechanical immortality represented both their greatest strength and their most fundamental limitation. The research conducted by the Maynarch dynasty had provided valuable insights into the nature of organic consciousness and the quantum signatures that might represent the essence of living souls, but their experiments had also revealed the enormous technical challenges involved in reversing the ancient transformation process. The biotransference chambers that had stripped away Necrontyr flesh and consciousness 60 million years ago had operated according to Catan technologies that exceeded even current Necron understanding, their exotic energy matrices incorporating principles that had been lost when the star gods were shattered and imprisoned. The most promising research into consciousness restoration had emerged from collaborative projects between different cryptech conclaves, their combined expertise allowing them to develop theoretical frameworks for reconstructing organic neural patterns within mechanical substrates. The psychomancers who specialized in consciousness manipulation worked alongside technomancers whose mastery of living metal provided the physical foundation for experimental consciousness transfer procedures. Their initial attempts had achieved limited success in preserving emotional responses and creative thinking during the transfer process, but the resulting hybrid consciousness patterns remained fundamentally different from naturally occurring organic minds. The discovery of intact Khatan shards within various tomb world vaults had provided new opportunities for biotransference research, as these fragments retained portions of the star god's original knowledge about consciousness manipulation and energy-matter conversion. The cryptechs who had gained access to these ancient prisoners had developed techniques for extracting specific information without risking the catastrophic consequences that would result from accidentally releasing a Khatan shard from its containment systems. The knowledge they had obtained suggested that true biotransference reversal would require the reconstruction of quantum field generators that could operate on scales comparable to those used during the original transformation process, their energy requirements exceeding the output of most stellar bodies. The practical applications of biotransference reversal research had produced incremental improvements in Necron consciousness preservation techniques, allowing newly awakened warriors to retain larger portions of their original personalities while maintaining the mechanical advantages that made them effective combatants. The enhanced revival protocols that resulted from this research had reduced the consciousness degradation rates in newly activated tomb worlds by approximately 15%, a significant improvement that suggested further advances might be possible with continued research and development. The psychological benefits of these improvements extended beyond individual warriors to encompass entire dynastic hierarchies, as nobles who had feared the gradual erosion of their identities began to hope for eventual restoration of their organic existence. The strategic implications of potential biotransference reversal created complex political dynamics within the awakening dynasties, as different factions pursued conflicting approaches to the research while competing for access to the limited resources required for large-scale consciousness restoration projects. The Silent King's personal interest in the research had elevated it to the highest priority within the Zarakan dynasty, but his authority over other dynasties remained limited by the traditional autonomy that individual pharaohs had always maintained. The resulting competition for research materials and technical expertise had created a secondary market in consciousness manipulation technologies, with different dynasties trading military support and territorial concessions for access to advanced cryptech knowledge. The long-term implications of successful biotransference reversal extended far beyond the immediate restoration of individual Necron consciousness, as the technology could potentially be applied to other forms of consciousness transfer and enhancement. The ability to preserve organic neural patterns within mechanical substrates while maintaining their creative and emotional capabilities could revolutionize the relationship between organic and mechanical intelligence throughout the galaxy. The prospect of creating hybrid consciousness forms that combine the advantages of both organic creativity and mechanical durability represented a fundamental advancement that could reshape the nature of intelligent life itself. The expansion of Necron influence throughout the galaxy had created strategic situations that challenged the traditional balance of power between the major galactic civilizations. The Imperium of man's response to the growing Necron threat had involved the redeployment of significant military resources from other fronts, weakening their defensive positions against chaos incursions and Tyranid advance elements. The Space Marine chapters that had been assigned to anti-Necron operations had developed new tactical doctrines specifically designed to counter mechanical opponents, but their effectiveness remained limited by the fundamental advantages that Necron technology provided in terms of durability and regeneration capabilities. The Eldari factions had begun coordinating their responses to the Necron awakening in ways that transcended their traditional rivalries and philosophical differences. The Craftworld Eldar had established intelligence-sharing protocols with their Dark Eldar cousins, while the Harlequins had begun performing new mythic cycles that interpreted the current crisis within the context of ancient prophecies about the galaxy's ultimate fate. The combined Eldari response represented the most significant cooperation between different Eldar factions since the fall of their empire, their shared recognition of the existential threat posed by the awakening Necrons overriding centuries of mutual hostility and competition. The Tyranid hive fleets had demonstrated remarkable adaptability in their encounters with Necron forces, developing new bioforms specifically designed to counter mechanical opponents and their unique technological capabilities. The Synapse creatures that coordinated Tyranid swarm tactics had evolved enhanced electromagnetic shielding that provided limited protection against Gauss weapon effects, while specialized warrior organisms had developed acidic secretions that could corrode living metal under sustained exposure. The evolutionary arms race between Tyranid adaptation and Necron technological innovation had created increasingly sophisticated countermeasures on both sides, their conflict representing a fundamental struggle between biological evolution and mechanical perfection. The chaos forces that had plagued the galaxy for millennia had found their traditional advantages largely neutralized by Necron immunity to corruption and psychological warfare. The expansion of Pariah Nexus installations had created vast regions of space where demonic manifestation became impossible, effectively quarantining chaos influence within areas that remained accessible to warp-based phenomena. The strategic implications of this development had forced the Chaos Powers to reconsider their long-term objectives for galactic domination, as their traditional methods of expansion and corruption proved ineffective against enemies who possessed no souls to tempt or terrorize. The Orc Empires had responded to the Necron, awakening with characteristic enthusiasm for new and challenging opponents, their warbosses viewing the mechanical warriors as the ultimate test of Orc combat prowess. The conflicts between Orc-Wa forces and Necron dynasties had produced some of the most intense and prolonged battles of the Awakening period, as both sides possessed the durability and regeneration capabilities necessary for extended combat operations. The Orcs' natural resilience and enthusiasm for warfare had made them surprisingly effective opponents for Necron forces, their crude but numerous weapons proving capable of overwhelming even advanced living metal repair systems through sheer volume of fire. The technological innovations that had emerged from the ongoing conflicts had accelerated the development of new weapon systems and defensive technologies throughout the galaxy. The Imperial forces that had survived encounters with Necron opponents had developed electromagnetic pulse weapons and specialized ammunition designed to disrupt living metal repair systems, while the Adeptus Mechanicus had begun incorporating quantum field generators into their most advanced equipment. The knowledge gained from analyzing captured Necron technology had advanced Imperial understanding of physics and engineering by centuries, though their ability to replicate the most sophisticated Necron systems remained limited by their lack of access to exotic materials and manufacturing techniques. The Silent King's strategic vision for the future of the Necron dynasties encompassed the gradual transformation of the galaxy into a realm dominated by mechanical intelligence and technological perfection. The establishment of the Pariah Nexus had begun this transformation by creating zones where psychic phenomena could not operate, forcing organic civilizations to rely on purely technological solutions to their problems. The expansion of these null field regions would eventually encompass the entire galaxy, creating conditions that favored mechanical consciousness over organic intelligence, while eliminating the supernatural advantages that had allowed younger races to challenge Necron supremacy. The ultimate success of this transformation would depend on resolving the fundamental challenges that faced the awakening dynasties, including the consciousness degradation that threatened to reduce their entire species to mechanical automatons, and the dynastic conflicts that prevented effective coordination of their military resources. The research into biotransference reversal represented the most promising solution to these challenges, as successful consciousness restoration could provide the creative thinking and emotional motivation necessary for long-term strategic planning, while maintaining the mechanical advantages that made Necron forces so formidable in combat. The galaxy of the 42nd millennium stood at a crossroads where the choices made by the awakening Necron dynasties would determine the ultimate fate of all intelligent life. The ancient tomb worlds continued their patient work of revival and reconstruction, their mechanical inhabitants gradually reclaiming territories that had been lost for 60 million years, while adapting to challenges that their creators had never anticipated. The outcome of their struggle would reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization, determining whether organic life would continue to flourish among the stars, or whether the galaxy would become a realm of perfect mechanical order, where consciousness existed only within substrates of living metal and quantum matrices. The awakening of the Necrons had begun as the stirring of ancient tomb worlds, but it had evolved into something far more significant: the potential rebirth of a civilization that possessed both the knowledge of ages and the technological capability to impose its vision of order upon the entire galaxy. Whether this vision would ultimately preserve or destroy the diversity of life that had flourished during their long sleep remained the greatest question facing all inhabitants of the 41st millennium, as the mechanical legions continued their inexorable march toward a future that only they could envision and only they possessed the power to create.